To order. Once again, unfortunately, Mayor Hala is not with us tonight, so as Mayor Pro Tem, I will be running the meeting. Our purpose tonight is to have a workshop on two important topics to the City of Ames. One, minimum property maintenance code discussion, and the other, the affordable housing strategy discussion. So we will be starting with the minimum property maintenance code, and I'll turn this over to Chief Higgins.
Good evening, Council and Mayor Pro Tem. Sarah and I are excited to be here tonight to review with you the minimum exterior property maintenance code. If you remember back, this started back in August of 2025 when Council requested a memo from staff with recommendations on a property maintenance code. So we're back a few years and we're back again. We've been here a couple different times. In May 25 of 21, we presented a rough draft of that ordinance with some consolidated code requirements, and we added a few sections based on complaints, and we also added an enforcement tool. In June 15th, we held a workshop similar to what we're doing tonight that was focused solely on public input. Prior to that meeting, we had done a survey that we sent out to the community. We had a great response. We had 100 of responses on all of the items that we were presenting to you on some of the issues that we found in our community that our community codes liaison would respond to. We took all of that input, we consolidated it, and we're back here tonight, and we're here to present that public input combined with what the minimum exterior property maintenance code, what we had proposed previously, listen to our customers, and we're back. We're going to present that. And we've tried to consolidate it down into really four main subjects: protection of the general public, public health, protection of property damage and or decay, and then other considerations. So as we go through, I know it's a long staff report, it's 22 pages. And then we also had all of the comments that you've seen, And then we also provided a summary of proposals. That's, I think, we got it down into 6 pages maybe. But there's 19 different items to try to help you in your process as you go through and evaluate that. So I'm going to turn it over to our building official, Sarah Van Meeteren, who's going to walk us through all of these items. And if any point in time, stop us. We can do a general overview of everything, but if you want to go through and ask, stop us, and we'll gladly speak to each of the issues. All right.
Maybe before we get started, I am curious, could you speak just generally to the question of whether other communities have adopted something similar, just to sort of set the table for us?
Yeah, so our initial proposal that we brought to you in 2021 did include a lot of information from other communities. So it's been a while, but if I recall, the template we used is based off of Cedar Falls. And then we took like Grass Height, for example, surveyed a whole bunch of central Iowa communities to see what they were doing. They ranged anywhere from 6 inches to 18 inches in height. So it's kind of all over. Everyone has their own thing. Some are based on zones, some are based on type of property. So it really is, most jurisdictions have something. Right. They just all have a little different nuances.
Literally, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of communities throughout the country that have minimum property maintenance codes. The different elements of it and the thresholds are different, but they date back to the 1970s when people started doing this.
So
from different parts of the country, different states.
So would you say that perhaps Ames is maybe not consistent with our peer communities and having some kind of minimum standards?
I wouldn't want to make that judgment. You have to make your judgment yourself as far as what you think is important here. I can just tell you other councils have made a decision to utilize this tool as a way to maintain the existing housing stock.
Okay.
That's what it's there for.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first category that we have is protection of general public traffic and pedestrian safety. This is the right-of-way vegetation, and Joshua is so happy to be here if you have questions about trees, vegetation in the right-of-way. He can help. The first
Joshua,
one,
come up.
So general right-of-way vegetation, the initial ordinance, he's going to hate me. The initial ordinance that we proposed had a vegetation height of 12 inches, but it didn't limit to any species. It didn't say turf grass only. It was just 12 inches in the right-of-way. The feedback that we got from the workshop and survey questions is that citizens didn't want the height limited, but they really understood that there might be visibility concerns and wanted us to have the ability to address those concerns. So maybe 12 inches isn't a visibility issue in one spot, but it is in another. They wanted to give us the ability to address those. So we have revised the proposal. The new draft would say a 1-foot buffer along the sidewalk and the street where vegetation has to be under 12 inches. And then also add the authority for staff to abate any visibility issues. So I think we would work with Parks and Rec, the traffic engineer, to determine, at this intersection, is this a visibility issue? We do currently have visibility triangle standards, but the way that that's measured, it almost never touches private property. The legs of the triangle end up being mostly in the right of way. So that might help. That standard says you have to keep under 3 feet. But there's other places that aren't at intersections that we might have visibility issues. For instance, if someone has tall vegetation in their right of way, as you can see in the bottom right picture, if you were pulling out of a driveway next to that, it might cause issues being able to see vehicles or pedestrians.
So Sarah, is the 1-foot buffer along the sidewalk and street something that's easy enough to enforce or identify as you're driving past so staff can monitor that somehow?
Yeah, I think enforcement would be pretty easy. Really, the intent is to keep those areas clear. So if you were to park a vehicle there, you could presumably open your door and get out without stepping into, something that's really tall. And you can pass through the sidewalk with ease. It's not something I've I would say that I saw when looking at other jurisdictions. So this is kind of just an idea we had to help with those couple issues. Just create a little buffer so that there's some space.
And is there a height at which it does become a problem? I mean, we went up to 12. How was that chosen versus 16 or?
So 12 was solely because right now the rental code says you have to have, you cannot have grass over 12 inches in height. So it's kind of a standard that we already have for grass height. That would be applicable on rental properties in the right of way. So now we're removing that 12-inch height. We're not recommending any height, just that if it's a visibility issue, except within that 1 foot buffer, then we would like it shorter.
But then it's 12. Thank you.
Council, and I think you'll see a lot of similarities. We tried to pull things from the rental code to bring over to the property maintenance code. So you'll see a lot of similarities between those two codes.
So right-of-way encroachments, this is one that we do enforce currently. However, we don't have a codified standard measurement. So we don't really have a good way to get to talk to the community and give them what the goal is. It's just, we'd like something in writing. It just makes education easier. So right now it's very vague. It just says you need to maintain the parking area, sidewalks. We initially proposed a 10-foot clearance above the sidewalk and 16 feet above the streets. That's what we've been kind of using as our standard. Citizen feedback, they thought that the 10 feet was too high, that many people wouldn't be able to reach that. I don't disagree with that. It's kind of that awkward spot where, you need a ladder or something to get to it. But we did recommend after looking at it, we recommended keeping the 10 feet because it matched up with the DOT policy. So if we were ever doing anything on anything along DOT roads, that would be what they would want. So there's the photo of the clear area that wouldn't, I think we were going to go down to 8 feet, but then found out that DOT actually recommended 10 and decided to stick to it. So the measurement on there should be 10 and 16 instead of the 8 and 13.
And this would be consistent with our shared use paths as well.
Some of you received complaints about shared use paths and overhanging. Remember, you're sitting up on a bike, so you're up a couple of feet already. So that's why we think 8 is not enough on the shared use path.
So, and I don't. At the end, I have a slide that has the number of complaints we have so far. So you can see in the right-of-way encroachments, I think it's like 200 maybe. We'll look at the end, but it kind of gives you a scope of how many there are and how helpful it would be for us to have these numbers in there.
So that, excuse me. So this also theoretically takes care of the shrubbery that is crowding the sidewalks because it is that vertical plane.
Yes.
along
So
the
that
sidewalk.
depiction in the bottom right is exactly what we're looking for. Nothing encroaching from the bottom, the side, or the top. Dangerous trees. So the initial ordinance that we had just kind of blanket said that we would prohibit all dangerous trees. If you recall, there was a lot of concern about the cost of removing trees. We've clarified the ordinance to state that we're only concerned with trees that would affect people or property in the right of way. So if we get a call, we get several of these, but if we get a call, a neighbor says that their neighbor has a tree in their backyard and it's going to fall on their property, the city doesn't get involved currently, and we're not proposing to. That's a civil matter between the two property owners. So this would just be if the tree was in any way going to interfere with the right of way. Placing and pushing snow on the streets, we initially said that it would just be prohibited to put snow on streets. I think that was confusing. Again, a lot of the feedback, if you'll recall, that we got was about the ordinance being very vague. The survey that went out to the citizens was vague. There wasn't a lot of information. It was just kind of a general feeler. So the actual ordinance that we have is a little more clear than what they had initially seen. So we want to clarify that now the ordinance is going to say that you can't push snow into the street once the street has been completely cleared. So Justin Clausen with Public Works said that this is a major issue. Once the street's cleared, if someone pushes snow into the street, and we're not talking like blows with your snow blower blowing your sidewalk and the street gets dusted with your snow. It's people that plow like commercial properties and push it across the street or dump it into the street. Then he has to have a truck come up and clear it again once it's froze and it becomes an issue for them. Debris on the sidewalk. So we have this, we still kind of use you have to maintain the sidewalk and keep it clear. The initial ordinance that we had just said prohibited debris from being on the walk. Citizens were concerned about how long the debris could be there. They really wanted a time frame. So we've revised it to say 10 daylight hours, and we've added clarification for accumulation. So the 10 daylight hours comes from the snow ordinance. If you recall, you have 10 daylight hours to clear your sidewalks of any snow. So this is similar to that. And we've added for accumulations, this is, as you can see in the photos, there's mud, leaves, grass clippings, seeds, anything that would make it dangerous for people. We've had several grass clipping complaints already this year where it makes the roadway or the sidewalk slick. So we want to be able to address those.
And
I-
is,
Water
Go ahead.
shown in that picture?
No, that's just mud.
Ah.
So there's some areas where there's just, it washes out. I don't know, a retaining wall's kind of falling out or something, stuff just sits there.
I know that there are some locations in the South Campus area where there are actually what appear to be possibly sump pumps that are washing onto the sidewalk.
Yep.
So I don't think those are allowed now, but this might also be something that could help us to better enforce that and explain to people why.
Absolutely.
That's-
So right now for sump pumps, we don't enforce on sump pumps that are discharging in front yards or back
Mhm.
of curb unless they're causing an issue. If they're causing icing in the winter, damming, mud like that, then we would say that you need to change it so that it's discharging somewhere else.
and this would be new for rentals as well? This would be something that rentals already have as a requirement, or this would be new for the entire city?
So so right now we would enforce, if we got any of the complaints you see there, we would enforce and just use the general, I think it's 22.10 chapter, that says you have to maintain it and keep it clear. So we're looking for a little more clarification on what can and cannot be there.
Thank you.
Excavations and holes. The initial ordinance said that you would be prohibited from having excavations on your property for more than 30 days. Citizens thought that if it's dangerous, why is it only dangerous after 30 days? Why not enforce on it when it's an issue? So we're proposing to remove the time frame. There was also some confusion about whether this applied to egress window wells, fire pits, open building excavations. And so we've put in some exceptions to clarify that it does not apply to those. There's very few of these, but I will tell you when we do have them, they are dangerous. And for whatever reason, they often happen right around sidewalks, sinkholes. So they can be quite dangerous. Category 2, public health. This is garbage, junk, vehicles. Really
I
fun.
have one question just procedurally. So is the goal tonight to go through all of this and then circle back to get council
Go through,
direction?
then you go
Yes.
through.
Okay.
Anything you want revised from our recommendation, that's where, I'll tell you what our recommendation is now. You can adjust that or approve them all. as we're suggesting.
Okay.
And there could be some we left out that you want to add to topics that aren't included in this, that you wish we could enforce.
So the first one, garbage receptacles at the curb. This is a requirement right now for rental properties, and it's 24 hours. So you have 24 hours to have your receptacle at the curb. That's not after garbage pickup. That's from the time that you place it there. The citizens, the feedback from them said that 24 hours was too short. We need longer. So we upped it to 48 hours. And then we're also recommending if we do increase that to 48 hours, we would go back and change the rental code so that the rental code matched and was also 48 hours. And just a reminder, we'll talk about enforcement a little bit later on. But if someone called and complained about a receptacle left at the curb, it's important to remember that by the time they're calling, it's already been out there a couple days. Our code enforcement officer has to see it out there for a couple days. Then we notify them. We'll leave a door hanger, try to talk to them. So really, this isn't, I think some people don't know the enforcement process and think we go out and we have tickets or stickers we put on something and you get in trouble. You don't. So we will work with you a lot. So 48 hours, 24 hours seems short, but really we're working with you and giving you opportunities to move it back. So you don't just get caught after 24 hours. Not like a parking ticket. That's a good example.
Does this include recycling receptacles? Because we've now got people that have this size recycling receptacle, but is that included in our definition?
No, that would be a good one to add, though, that just included in it.
Because if part of our concern is the tipping of the receptacles into the street and the challenges for motorists, it seems like the recycling receptacles would also be.
There's also, they've become really popular, like those construction bags that you can get and then just fill with construction debris. We could include those as well.
Yes, I also have yard waste receptacles. Do you want to differentiate them or not?
That's true.
Not include them in this. It's up to you.
So we could just add a definition of receptacle, maybe, that would include all of them. Outdoor storage of garbage and junk. So the proposed ordinance combined refuse, garbage, junk from being stored on a property for more than 48 hours. So right now we use an outdoor storage section in the zoning code that really isn't intended for enforcement. It's 72 hours. So we were hoping to knock it down to 48 hours. By the time we need to enforce and utilize the 48 hours, we're to a citation. So we've gone through a lot of educational outreach and tried to explain the ordinance. So the intent was to shorten the amount of time we have to take photos to take to court. Citizens thought 48 hours was too short. So the revised proposal, same as now, is just to keep it at 72 hours. And then it also includes refuse, garbage, junk, all of those, which are now kind of spread in 2 or 3 different chapters. Stagnant water, the initial proposal was just that it couldn't exist on a property. Feedback was that a time frame needed to be added. So we added 48 hours. So you can't have water standing on a property for longer than 48 hours. We did also add a definition of stagnant water. There were a lot of questions about whether it included bird baths and koi ponds. So we explained that it's water that's trapped and doesn't circulate.
And not in a container.
It could be in a container.
So with a lid, though.
Correct. Like a rain barrel would be
It
fine.
could be, okay.
Yeah.
I guess.
Like the pool, I would say someone could call that a container, right? It's contained. Conditions that harbor vermin. This was pulled in from the model code we had. Citizens were very concerned about what vermin were, how we would define that. So we just said we're okay with removing it. There wasn't a strong need for it based on complaints that we have. And so staff is okay having that section removed. Junk vehicles are currently prohibited from being on a property for more than 48 hours. The code right now has very specific criteria about what is junked. I think that was one of the concerns initially, just in that it just wasn't given to the public when we had the survey out. So we can cite the owner, we can remove the vehicle now. We're not recommending any changes for junked vehicles. We will be consolidating the code so it's a little cleaner, but really no philosophical changes. The junk vehicle exceptions, we're not recommending any changes, but want to make sure that council is aware of what they are. And if you feel any changes need to be made, you can make them. Right now, if you have a junk vehicle on your property, it's exempted from the code. If it has a tight fitting vehicle cover, it's in a garage or shed, behind a wall, 6 feet in height, on a salvage yard. We're not recommending changes, but as you can see, some of the photos, like, I think you need to decide if does a vehicle cover take away the fact that you have a vehicle stored there, a junk vehicle stored there. Some people think it looks worse. Some people think it looks better. Some are indifferent. So we just wanted to make you aware that those were the current exceptions. If you like them, okay. If you don't, we're open to changing them. I think that's the next slide. Yeah. So also part of the junked vehicle code now is a provision for vehicles that are not declared junked. Right now, the code says that they can't be on a property for more than 15 days. There is an exception. If you're out of town for more than 15 days, you can leave it there, but not exceeding 180 days. That's very difficult for us to enforce. There were a lot of concerns about the time frame that people could keep operable vehicles on their property. And so we're just recommending removing it based on that citizen feedback. 15 days is virtually impossible for us to enforce and take to a judge. So it really doesn't, it just seems to be an arbitrary number. It's not helpful to us. So we're okay removing that.
Does this also cover the RVs?
I think we're getting there.
That's the other one. Okay.
Protection of property damage. So right now, you might recall we have a dangerous building code. It has very, very strict criteria for a structure to be declared dangerous. And there's often times that structures are on the verge of that, but they're not there and we can't do anything with them. We like the ability to help resolve them, help keep structures habitable. Once they get to a point like the one in the photo, they get demolished, and we don't want to see that if we don't have to. So we'd like to be able to require people to maintain them before they get to this point. So we've, I think, oh, no. So with that one, we have basically the code says that you have to maintain it from structural maintenance, chipping paint. There's some very, I wouldn't say strict criteria, but it does give us a good basis. So there's not, I think long time ago, maybe people talked about chipping paint and it had to be 40% of the wall or something. We're not saying that. So it does leave a lot of it up to our interpretation. But I think it will help us in situations where we need that assistance. And then it also states that you have to repair it with a like material. So you might recall a photo we had a few years back of a house on Grand where they had a hole in the roof and it was repaired with a piece of like metal flashing. That would not be an appropriate fix now. You would have to fix it with a like material based on what we're proposing.
What was the feedback you received on this?
A lot of feedback, again, about cost and what about people that can't maintain their homes, can't afford to paint it. That was really it. Maybe about it being vague also, but they didn't see what we considered free of structural defects.
And I hope tonight at some point we are able to have a conversation about finding ways to help financially with some of these situations. But there is a property in the Parkview subdivision that I live in that is really substantially in decay, and it's having major impacts on all the properties around them. And people have reached out to me for years, and we may have talked about this, and your hands are tied because it's not bad enough where the roof's collapsing or something. But I feel very sorry for these people, and I want to find a solution to this. Mm-hmm. And this comes up with enough frequency. The nice thing about Ames is that because the property values are such, people are incentivized to maintain their properties in ways that some of our smaller communities, you're going to have a higher number, perhaps in some of our smaller declining communities where the houses aren't maintained. But I think we need to fix this. I really do.
So Sarah, with regard to the vegetation issue
Mhm.
and the ingress and egress,
Mhm.
are we talking specifically there about doors, or are we also talking about windows?
That's a good question. We could probably clarify. I think I initially was thinking doors, but yeah, you're right. Windows are a form of ingress and
Mhm.
egress.
Yeah, if it's like, what do they call the window?
The egress windows in the
yeah.
basement?
Yeah,
Yeah.
then yes, but if it's just a airflow window.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the reason we've got the egress windows in the basement is so that people can escape in the event of an emergency. And the same could be true on the first floor of a house
Usually
or
those-
second floor.
I mean, fire code would require 2 exits on a structure. Is that how you so that's why the egress window. It's not that every window in your house has to be.
No, no.
Open
What
up.
I'm saying is, though, that we required that egress window because of the living space
Right.
in the basement.
Uh.
And so theoretically, again, if someone needs to get out of the house, I don't know what the requirement is on upper floors. What is the egress requirement?
Yeah, for a single family dwelling, there would not be a requirement. When they build it, they would have to have an egress window for every bedroom. But as far as going out and enforcing it after it's built, that's
Mhm.
really hard to do. We really don't have a mechanism in place for single family dwellings within the fire code.
So then I guess my question would be, if we view windows as points of ingress or egress, are there safety concerns about the dense vegetation? Or do we just say we need to have the door clear because we have to have that escape route?
So that's what we're proposing. The initial ordinance said dense vegetation for this reason, right? And people didn't like the word dense.
Mhm.
It was ambiguous. So we took out vegetation completely and just are prohibiting circumstances that would prohibit ingress or egress. I think you can see in the left picture, there's actually stuff piled in front of the
Mhm.
doorway too. So that's something that we could also use.
Is it understood, though, by someone reading this, that this means a door as opposed to just having the windows covered up?
Well, I think that's what the word egress.
I
would
don't,
imply
but I'm
exit. That's-
asking that, right? So if I'm asking that after looking at this, the average person may be going, I don't know what that means,
Yeah, I think that's
Window.
fair. I think that's fair to say. When we wrote this, the intent was the door as
Okay.
ingress, egress, for emergency responders to get in and to get out. Also to see addresses, which are usually on the near the door. So
That
I
makes
think
sense.
from an enforcement standpoint, it'd be difficult to determine what windows are egress windows and what
Mhm.
aren't, because some bedrooms have both, right? Some you may have multiple windows within a bedroom, but only one of them may meet the requirement for egress. So I think our intent is focused on the door itself to the structure.
Oh, I got ahead of myself. Structural maintenance. So that top left and bottom left are good examples of paint. That's to the point where the structure is going to suffer. We're not trying to get up with a microscope to see if you have chipping paint. So we really want to salvage the structure. That's the intent. So the concerns again were just ability to make repairs, and then the vagueness of maintained. Where staff feels that the language we have in the proposed ordinance to define what maintained is sufficient. Unfortunately, the public just didn't see that when we received input last time. So we're not suggesting any alternatives now, but certainly open to something if we have specifics. Vacant structures, we would require these to be secured. The biggest concern was securing sheds on a property. People were confused, I think, about what is a vacant structure. Is a shed on my property vacant? So we've added language to clarify that any accessory structure on a property whose primary structure is occupied would not be considered vacant. So if you choose to not lock your shed, you can choose to not lock your shed. We're not going to say that it's unsecured or vacant. We really are trying to address larger issues, as shown in the photos. Windows broken out. We've had squatters in that building. We've had squatters in a lot of buildings, so we want to just make sure they're secure. When they're open and people find them, they become a huge, huge hazard. Fire hazard. They're not good.
Yeah, as well as a law enforcement concern.
Yeah.
We get a lot of complaints from the neighbors when we have structures that are boarded up or are vacant. Their safety is starting to get jeopardized, and that's what we hear from neighbors that have vacant structures within their neighborhoods.
Side note, there are many jurisdictions, Des Moines being one, that has a vacant property registration program. So if you are leaving town and your property is going to be vacant, if you're moving out, if a bank is taking over, they have to register the property and have a file with the city with a contact so that we have someone to talk to. So just interesting that there's a lot of, you can drive around towns and see stuff boarded up. The city does that as part of their registration program. Other considerations that just kind of didn't really have a spot is the last category. I think graffiti graffiti is first. So the biggest concern with graffiti when we initially discussed it was, what is graffiti? If someone wants to paint a mural on their garage, can they? Yes. So we've clarified it to say that it's markings that are made without the consent of the property owner. Currently, graffiti is only prohibited on rental properties, which, as you can imagine, isn't where our major concern is. It's on commercial properties. And so we'd like the ability to enforce on those. The proposed ordinance required 48 hours before, so we would notify the owner and then they'd have 48 hours to remove it. The citizen feedback was that was not enough time, so we've increased it to 7 days. So an increase to 7 days and a clarified definition that states that it's done without the consent of the owner.
How is this one seems, well, I'm sorry, we're saving all our questions for the end, but this one seems so unenforceable to me in that you would go to a property owner and say, hey, you have to get that graffiti off there. And then if they can't do that, say they don't have the finances to do it or the mechanisms or whatever, they'd just be like, oh, I like it there. It just seems like I don't know who would.
I think probably at that point we would have our police department talk with them. They have, in fact, it's been a while now. We were tracking graffiti through our GIS system because much of it was gang symbols, and most of us don't know them. So the police department can go out and say, yeah, that's an issue. I don't really think you want that on your building. And maybe that education would help them understand what it is. I know Joshua has experience removing graffiti at park properties too. And the sooner we get it cleaned up, the less likely it's going to happen again. A lot of it, as you can see, when one person does it, then people just keep adding to it.
Interesting. Okay.
Recreational vehicle parking. So the current ordinance allows one travel trailer, RV, boat, etc., to be parked behind the front yard on an approved parking surface, as long as it's not used for living purposes. Then the outdoor storage code comes in and would limit it to 72 hours. So we allow it to be parked there, but not stored. The proposed ordinance, this removed the time frame, so we would no longer be counting the 72 hours. As long as the RV was parked behind the front of the house and on an approved surface, it could stay there. And then we also clarified that we're adding trailers. So right now we kind of have a loophole with trailers where they're not vehicles, they're not travel trailers, and so we'd like to clarify that trailers are included.
Do we have any kind of concerns with the length of the RV?
Not currently.
There are some large RVs in Ames.
I saw a large boat in front of your house.
Yes.
It was huge. So yours?
I wish it was my boat.
No,
Thankfully-
there's not, but certainly
Thankfully,
could
we're
be.
not on television right now.
Yeah, right. We could certainly add length, size restrictions. Probably most of those, the big, like the one on the bottom left, would be my guess that you may not be able to get that behind the front of your house. So it just depends. If that's something you're interested, we can certainly look at average lengths of recreational vehicles and give you some ideas of what normal might be. You can decide what you'd like.
And I know you're going to give us some data later, but how many folks typically complain about an RV in a neighbor's yard?
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot. So generally speaking, in the summer, we will educate and let people know that this is a rule. You got to keep moving it. It's extremely hard to enforce though because people are using them. So the time that it takes for us to prove that it's been there that long and then it's gone. So we kind of just educate and let it be. Once October, the camping season is over, then they need to be gone. But we do receive quite a few complaints about them.
So with regard to the complaints, what's the nature of the complaint? Just the size of the vehicle?
I think the size, because I would say they're not blocking the sidewalk. They're just there in one's front yard. Sometimes we do get complaints that they're plugged in, which there's no rule against them being plugged in. We do get complaints about them parked on the street and plugged in, and we require them to move because we can't have the cord over the sidewalk. Other than that, it's just a complaint.
So the picture in the upper right
Mhm.
would not be allowed, even though that is parked on a driveway, because it's in the front of the house.
Correct.
And if that person moved that trailer out into the street to park it, how long would it be allowed to sit on the street without moving?
48 hours.
But they could pour a pad next to the house and it could be there all the time.
Well, maybe they don't have room to pour a pad though.
Next to that.
I'm just trying to fit the hours requirements around the purpose that people have for parking there in the first place. And I know we received one email when we had the bus discussions about somebody who keeps their RV in storage and then times how long they can have it at their house. So they bring it out of storage and park it when they're getting ready to leave. And that all just seems really Byzantine somehow to require that when they could just pull into their driveway and leave it there until they're getting ready to leave.
Mhm.
But they aren't able to park it in their driveway. They have to park it on the street.
But you're saying this proposed ordinance does remove that time frame.
That's what we're proposing. So right now, the time frame would be 72 hours. We're proposing to not have one, much like we're proposing to not have a time frame for operable vehicles.
But they still wouldn't be able to park there
In the-
because it's in front of the
Right.
house.
So the bottom right and the middle would probably, the bottom right's not because it's mud that they're parked on. The middle one, forget that it's up on a jack. That would be an appropriate location for it to be parked.
So in a driveway or behind a house if they had a spot for it behind their house.
But
Not
not in the driveway.
Not in the
front.
driveway.
So
But,
the top right one where it's in the driveway in front of the house would not be allowed.
but that's a side driveway.
Right.
So that's okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. That's what I meant.
Yep. So behind the front of the house.
Side yard, it's in the side yard as well.
I got you.
So what I'm trying to figure out is why we would want them to park that on the street for
Rather
up to
than-
72 hours instead of on their driveway, even if it's in front of the house for up to 72 hours. And maybe somebody else can help me with that because my neighborhood doesn't have this challenge. It's mostly students and, not a lot of RVs. So
I think most of this is aesthetics, right? There's no public health thread going on with any of this vehicle parking standard, really.
It just seems like it would make more sense to say, as long as it's a legal parking space, up to 72 hours.
Or no time limit.
Yeah, or no time. But-
I'm
So
fine.
just
I-
remove the behind the front yard
Yeah.
Yeah,
component.
and I don't know, like I say, in my neighborhood, we don't have the issue, so I would be looking to everybody else here to kind of clarify that for me.
Okay, tall grass. So the proposed ordinance prohibited turf grasses from exceeding 12 inches in height. Citizen feedback was that they really felt that 12 inches was too short and they wanted to have native vegetation, which naturally exceeds 12 inches. So we have changed the ordinance to recommend 12-inch maximum height on turf grasses specifically. So those that did want native vegetation could have that in their property. And again, I kind of said it earlier, statewide, the jurisdictions in central Iowa are all over the board with grass height. And rental code is 12 inches.
Would we also change rental code to exempt native?
I would prefer that they matched, yes.
Yeah.
So if we're going to change this, I would like to change that.
Okay, good. I mean, I think it's good. It's incentive to do native plantings if people don't want to have to mow.
Mhm.
So again, we heard lots and lots of feedback at the workshop, and a lot of it was about owners' ability to make these repairs. So I just cited a couple different things. The dangerous building code right now, if you were declared dangerous and we had to abate or demolish the structure, we do have the ability to waive up to $1,000, and the code also gives council the ability to waive more. I'm not aware of this ever being done before, but it's there. Also, maybe the Story County Housing Trust, I understand they have funds to reimburse for major repairs on owner-occupied structures. And then just based on the number of people that said, maybe it's not a financial issue, it's a medical issue, whether it be physical or mental health, potentially creating a volunteer program where citizens can donate time. I think we've had really good, what's it called? The Repair
Repair
Cafe?
and care,
Mhm.
wasn't it? Oh, the
The Repair Cafe, where people are donating their time to fix things. And then, yes, we did have Ames Repair and Care, where volunteers worked with fraternities and different organizations throughout the city to provide assistance to those that need it. And that was utilized. We referred a number of people through that program. Volunteer Center is no longer here, so we don't have that program. But given its success, I think it's something that the city could be very successful with. Other cities you can see there, they do all sorts of different things, home improvement programs, forgivable loans. That's just wanted you to see that those are out there. Up to you.
Do you have any information on how they fund those programs?
I don't. We're also adding an appeal process. So these code sections that we're consolidating are now in about 9 different code sections. And as you can imagine, have 9 different enforcement procedures. We have Building Board of Appeals, Rental Housing Appeal Board, Zoning Board of Adjustments that hear appeals on many of the things you saw tonight. We are recommending one appeal process for anything in this ordinance, just so that the enforcement is the same. We're hoping that it would be a board comprised of neighborhood representatives, maybe similar to council, that would hear appeals if they don't feel their property was in violation. So the enforcement process, we talked about this a little bit. The current process is complaint driven. We focus on education. We really try to teach people what the code is. A lot of people don't know that the code exists or what it says or how to read it, how to find it. So that's our first job. And then we send several notices out, the last one being sent by certified mail. If we don't have compliance after that, we can issue a citation. That was a note for me to put in there, how many citations we've issued, and I didn't. So not many. So I would say that citations are our last resort. It's really only used to get compliance. So by the time we're getting to a citation, it's because we need the court to give us permission to go on the property, and it takes a long time. So a citation, if I got it to the legal department, it'll take a couple weeks to get reviewed. Could take a couple weeks to get served by certified mail, and then a court date is set at least 6 weeks out, and that's just for them to say whether they're guilty or not. So we could still have a trial after that, where ideally, if our decision is upheld, then we get permission to enter the property. So it takes a really long time. We're asking for an additional abatement tool to be added to help with this, that would allow us to abate violations without going through the court process, and then assess the cost of abatement back to the property. So we already do this. If we issue a citation and we do have to abate, we are assessing the cost back to the property already. That will be, the owners can pay that with their property taxes. They can pay it at any time, or it will get cleared up at the time the property sells. So ideally, at some point, we get those funds back. It could be a while, but it's a better use of our time, I think, and resolves issues for the citizens in a more timely manner than going through the court process. Many of these times, if the person that's in violation maybe can't make the changes, doesn't want to, whatever the reason, we found that often adding a $500 citation doesn't help our goal of gaining compliance. So court costs and $500 citation puts it around $600 now. It's just not helpful. So we'd like the ability to abate without adding $600 to what they owe.
Yeah, and I want to remind council, this is after many attempts to work with the customer, even to the point if they can come up with a plan on how they're going to clean up the junk, if that's the violation that we're working with them, we are diligent at working with them to clean it up. The goal is always enforcement. Like Sarah said, I want to reiterate that point, is the fines, the citations, they do not gain compliance. It's not our goal. It's for them to be a good neighbor and come into compliance with the code.
Just to stand on just for a moment, there would still be a process for appeal. Am I correct on that? I just want people to understand that there's still a due process right they would have.
Yes. So both of the appeal boards that I oversee have a 30-day appeal timeframe from the time we've notified you of an issue. So if we've notified you and we give you 30 days to appeal, we're not going to cite you within that 30 days. We can't, because you could appeal on day 30. So yes, if you ever, the other boards have very strict reasons for appeal. Some are that you can't do it because there's fixed conditions. So this board would have to have different procedures, but we would come up with what meets the intent of this.
Very good. Thank you.
Just want to emphasize what we're doing here is we're adding a tool. We're not saying every one of the complaints will be handled with this tool. It gives the enforcement people an alternative, another arrow in their quiver, if you will. So it's not going to be required or utilized in every case.
So does that abatement tool kick in before or after the 30-day appeal period?
So if it was like an imminent threat, we could use it immediately if it was something that was going to injure someone. Otherwise, we wouldn't get to the abatement tool until we've exhausted all of our notices.
This is probably a silly question, but can you have a citation with no financial attachment? So if the citation is just a trigger for you to be able to enter the property, could you have a $0 value citation that would achieve that?
So we can, the violation is up to $500. We can always, so usually once it gets to citation, we'll work with the legal department and the defendant to, if they can come into compliance, we might drop the charge. We might reduce the fine. So they'll still plead guilty, but we've reduced it so there's not a fee. What they can't get out of is the court cost.
Sure.
So that $100 would always be there.
Yeah.
But we've often waived the fee if we got compliance.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to know, I think, because I think that's one of the big fears for a lot of people I've talked to, is that we would continue to financially disadvantage someone. And while they can't get out of the court costs, at least we do have the ability to cite without our fine on top of that. That's interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
Again, perhaps there's a process that would allow them, if they're issued a citation, if they are to come into compliance, where that citation can be completely removed.
Okay.
One of the complaints we get too quite often is that we're not responsive enough. And so we receive the complaint, we go out, we start the investigation process, and the customer that called in the complaint calls in a couple weeks later and wants to know why we're not doing our job. And so it's managing that expectation from the neighbor that we're going to come out and do what we do to bring the neighborhood, the home into compliance, and that does take time. So,
And I think there is a thought process out there that the citation is much like a parking ticket, that we can just walk up and hand it to you. And that's not the case. It's not a parking ticket. It's not a speeding ticket that we're writing in our car. It goes through the legal department and goes through the whole court process.
Okay.
Numbers, I promise numbers. So this is over the last 4 years from June to June, 19 to 23. This is the different types of cases we have. So I need to warn you though, like, let's see, for example, garbage receptacles, there's 34 of those. The problem is garbage receptacles right now, the ordinance is only for rental properties. So I can't tell you how many garbage receptacle complaints we may have had on owner occupied properties. Same with tall grass. If a tall grass complaint comes in and we look up and it's not a rental property, we're not looking for tall grass. We'll still go out, we'll see if there's any noxious weeds, but it would not fall under a tall grass complaint. So it's hard to think about how this fits on owner occupied, since we can't enforce all of them on owner occupied now, but it does put it into perspective, I think.
And how many of, say there's, I don't know, 800.
1,125 maybe.
Thanks. 1,125 complaints. How is that? Do you have a sense of if that's like 10 people or if that's 1,100
Oh.
people?
Well, thankfully we have C-Click Fix, and we have a lot of people. The app is very, very heavily utilized. So right-of-way vegetation, 298 complaints. I can tell you probably 80% of those are people walking and using the app. And so we can see, I could run and see approximately how many are from C-Click Fix, but I couldn't tell you how many are different people because you can report anonymously.
Sure.
But how many reports, let's say for outdoor storage, are on the same property?
These are different cases opened. So these are
Okay.
not total complaints received. These are different cases. So we might have opened 2 on one house in a year. So that would count for 2. If we receive 10 complaints about that property, it only counts for 1 up there. And I've removed from this number any complaints that were unfounded. So if somebody complained about it and we went out and it wasn't a violation, those have been removed as well. So these are actual code violations that we opened cases for.
And 4 years worth of data, that's not an average of the 4 years.
Correct. This is total.
Okay.
And Sarah, can you remind me how many citations we issued over those 4 years roughly?
Maybe if I looked it up. Not many. I'm trying to think. It's very few. Most of the citations our office has issued are directly from rental code violations that aren't on here, just failure to comply in general, or building code violations for not obtaining permits. So very few citations we write are for code compliance. I know we have a couple properties that we issue a couple citations to each year, and that's probably about all.
And those would be properties that we're working with on a consistent basis.
Mhm. Yeah, so I could say too, like repeat offenders like that, we don't go through the educational process every time we get a new case open. So if we know that we've got an issue, we will issue the citation. And now we've been asking the court to give us like 90 days to abate. So if we clean it up and then it happens again within 90 days, we can still use that court order to continue to clean the property up.
I think the point with the citations is it's a tool that's not used that often. I just want to remind people that are listening and counsel that the goal is not citation. The goal is to come into compliance through education.
Do we have anything else that you want to present to us?
No?
Then
That was
council,
it.
do you have additional comments, questions for Sarah or Joshua or Rich? If not, I wasn't planning to take public input on this, but it doesn't look like we have a huge crowd. Are there any of you who are here to give public input on this issue? Please come forward and give us your name and address. Yes, and the orange card goes to Jeremy. Thank you.
Promise to be quick, Josh. So Erin Gibson, 1011 Harding Avenue. I just had a few notes. One, big thank you, because I could totally see the difference in the change on the notices. So thank you. I know that took a lot of time to go through all that, and it's hard to make everybody happy. One was just on the vegetation over 12 inches on the row. I agree that that's a best practice of allowing people to park. I just wanted to point out that if it's an accessibility issue, it's really on the parking side of the street, because the other thing of being addressed on the row of that vertical, like you can't go over, it's taking care of it. So I wanted to point out that, and maybe putting in the word of safety concerns instead of visibility concerns, so that you're not having people bother you on aesthetics of, well, I don't like it. Well, is it a safety concern or you just don't like it? And then just on the structural integrity for exterior structural requirements, I just did notice some things on like fencing and consistent materials and uniform and color that seems to be going a little bit more on aesthetic than, hey, yes, I, put something on my roof to keep it from leaking. It may not be aesthetically pleasing, but I am still taking care of the house, because that can be expensive. And back, sorry, on the 12 inches by row, I did notice a non-vegetative materials like chicken wire. I just thought of our row trees and how you put protective stuff around them, and that might limit city or personal property of protecting trees. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have any comments on the issue of the protection for trees?
I think that's a really good one for Joshua.
Oh, yes.
He's waited so nice.
So the protection is obviously to protect the tree from, because the city puts a high investment on these trees, and the last thing we want to do is have it damaged by whether it's animals or anything else. However, our new forester Gabby is not able to be here tonight. We are trying to only put protection in our park system, because that's where we're seeing a lot of deer damage. We're not actually seeing a lot of deer damage in the right of way. Mainly that's what the damage that we're dealing with. So we've actually started to remove a lot of the protection from the right of way trees, and mainly focusing a lot on the protection of our park trees.
So then we probably don't have to worry about it in the ordinance, because it's not going to be a thing anymore. Are there any other people who wanted to give input on this? If not, I will move on to the next exercise here, which is the summary of proposed revisions, which we can use for making motions on each of these issues. And I believe staff would like direction on each of the numbered items that appears in attachment A, although it says attachment B up on the screen. I'm confused. I think it's attachment A for us. And maybe what we can do is with each of these, as we move through them, if council has modifications to the suggested wording, we could discuss that before a motion is made. But otherwise, my intent would be to move through these motion by motion. And if we agree, I would just ask that somebody make the possible motion as it is spelled out on the sheet. And we move on to the next one so that if we do have any additions or corrections, we can handle those more effectively. Okay? So the first item is vegetation in the right-of-way. The initial staff proposal is 12 inches maximum vegetation, but we are now at 12 maximum within 1 foot of sidewalk or street. No other maximum height. Vegetation can be removed if causing a visibility issue. Council, do I have a motion on this issue?
I'll move the proposed motion.
Is there a second?
Any chance you want to change the word visibility to safety on that one? That was a good suggestion just because of the
Mhm.
difference between an aesthetic concern and a safety concern, just in case someone were reading this and called in one because they didn't like the way it looked. So.
There is no issue with swapping safety for visibility because the visibility is a safety concern, correct?
Right.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah, it's dealing with the visibility triangle, I think was the language we pulled from, but safety would be the same consideration.
Okay.
I am amenable to that friendly amendment.
In that case, I'll second.
So the motion has been made and seconded to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits plantings in the right-of-way from exceeding 12 inches within 1 foot of the street and sidewalk and allows staff to require any vegetation creating a safety issue to be removed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item is vegetation encroaching into the right-of-way. The revised staff proposal is that we have vegetation hanging over the streets must have a 16-foot clearance, and vegetation hanging over the sidewalks and bike paths must have a 10-foot clearance, which is DOT standard. Do I have a motion or an amendment to this language?
I'll try this one as well. I'll move the proposed motion, except there be an 8-foot clearance over sidewalks and bike paths.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Council discussion.
I like the 10-foot one. I mean, because really 8 feet, like a homeowner is going to have to get a ladder for that too. I mean, I'm pretty tall, and to get the leverage you need on a snippers to take down a branch at 8 feet, like you're going to have to get out a ladder anyway. So to me, 10 feet's not.
My thought process on this is that 8 feet is going to be ample height for cyclists, for walkers. I don't know that we need 10 feet on the sidewalks. I think 8 feet provides the adequate passage in that area. I don't want to make it higher than it needs to be.
Sure. I like the DOT standard thing is all. So, but I hear you. I mean,
Are there instances where we may be getting funding from the DOT that would require that standard?
In the city.
I think so. Well,
In
not under
neighborhoods.
shared.
Any federally funded project would require the 10-foot.
Mhm.
any
But if-
federally funded project.
In neighborhoods, or is that primarily trails, like, which already is covered, right? with
It's more of the shared use paths, I would assume.
Right.
Without Public Works here, I can't be 100% confident.
So it occurs to me that we have, I believe, in the past used some perhaps CDBG money for
Could be.
sidewalk
Yes.
repairs,
Yes.
and that is federal money. So I don't know whether that would apply in
doesn't
this
matter.
case or not.
I wouldn't give you a definitive answer unless I checked on it, whether it's bike paths or sidewalks.
It's absurd to me that someone in Washington, D.C. is going to tell us how to do our vegetation in Ames, Iowa. It's a little bit of an overreach.
Well, no comment. All right, so the motion has been made and seconded that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the initial proposed language that requires a 16-foot clearance over public streets and an amended 8-foot clearance over sidewalks and bike paths. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Nay. Motion carries. Next one is dangerous trees. This prohibits dangerous trees that pose an immediate threat to people or property in the right-of-way. Do I hear a motion? Either what is given or an amendment to that?
I'll move the proposed language.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that, well, do I have any discussion on that? It's been moved and seconded to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits dangerous trees that pose a threat to the right-of-way. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item, placing snow, ice onto public streets. The revised staff proposal prohibits snow and ice from being pushed onto the public street after the street has been cleared. Do I have a motion or an amendment to the motion that has been suggested?
I'll move the proposed motion.
Is there a second? Do we have discussion of that?
You said that this was really only a problem on commercial properties? Or, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it happens a lot on like apartment buildings where they have to plow out of a driveway and then across and place the snow somewhere else. So it's not so much like my driveway where I'm blowing it into the street. It's really someone's intentionally taking it across the roadway.
And we don't have anything already for rental that would cover apartment buildings?
No, and the issue would be that they're taking it from one property and pushing it onto another. So yeah, aside from them having to have a sidewalk clear and clear parking spaces, nothing that says you can't push it onto someone else's property.
And I think it does occur on private property as well, because I have seen some commercial plows come into people's driveways and push the snow across the street. So it's not just.
And I think what Justin really wanted this one. I think what he wants is just a talking point with those folks that are doing it, so he can stop and say, hey, this is an issue, just so you know it's against the code.
Okay.
He really wants to be able to talk with them when he sees them doing it. So aside from that, we wouldn't necessarily know who put it there. So it's really not enforceable in that way.
So would there be a clarification that this isn't your home snow blower, which I think I hear you saying, but it would be commercial vehicles pushing snow?
Yep, we could specify that. I think we thought that by clarifying that it was once the street was completely cleared.
Mhm.
Typically, that's not an issue with snow blowers in residential areas, but we could indicate
Right.
commercial areas. I do think that Gloria is right that, some of the plows, the trucks that just have a blade go in and put the blade down and pull it out and it ends up in the street. So that can be an issue then when it freezes
Right.
after the street's cleared, obviously.
Yeah. I just wouldn't want a resident to worry so much about, or just say that we're being overzealous in what we're doing, right? Because I can just imagine they're going to be like, fine, I won't push snow onto the street if you don't push it back onto my sidewalk after I've already cleaned my, I see what you mean about it's just commercial property. But if we could somehow clarify that might be
Yeah.
It's
helpful.
not just
Make
commercial,
an addendum.
apartments are residential, so you have to be careful with terminology.
Okay.
Are,
So
are they though?
apart.
What
Yeah.
are they? Aren't they taxed commercial? No, they're okay.
Down the tax road.
So we do have a motion on the table.
Okay.
So let's take a vote on that first. All those in favor of the proposed motion, and maybe I didn't read this yet. Direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits snow and ice from being pushed onto the public street once the street has been cleared. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
How many nays was that? 2?
Yeah.
Motion carries. Item number 5, depositing mud, gravel, etc. on sidewalks. This prohibits snow, ice, mud, gravel, grass clippings, leaves, etc. to remain for more than daylight 10 hours after the cause of accumulation. Do we have the possible motion or an alternative to that motion?
This is a little tricky for me. So somebody's mowing their grass and there's some grass clippings that get on the sidewalk. This happens. So there's an element of subjectivity here. I'm worried about neighbors weaponizing this and looking for an opportunity to tweak their neighbor. And then leaves, we have leaves, they fall. And so somebody's traveling, they're gone for a couple days, and they have leaves on their sidewalk. I mean, I feel like we're overthinking those pieces a little bit. What we're trying to get at are situations where there's debris, there's snow, mud. Can you help me out, sort of think through? And then I'm concerned about the 10 hours too. That seems really fast.
Yes. So grass clippings, I think that this includes some discretion, right? If I go and there's a few grass clippings, I'm probably just going to kick them to the side of the sidewalk and walk away. If there's clumps of grass clippings on the sidewalk and it could cause an issue or make it difficult to push a stroller past, a bicycle, walk across, then we would leave a note for the owner just saying clear off your sidewalk. So again, I think we got to remember the educational process where we're going to leave a door hanger. We're going to explain to you this needs to be done. Keep the sidewalk clear. I think leaves are inevitable. Grass clippings might be inevitable. But we really want to keep, I think, the more egregious violations and people that just don't do anything, we want to be able to have them clean up their walk so that it's passable.
I think we did just receive several emails from a resident with disabilities who has actually had accidents caused by riding a bike and slipping on the grass clippings that have been left on some portions of the sidewalk or on trails. And so it is a real safety hazard especially for certain individuals.
What about in situation, I can think of some properties near my house that have recurring mud. So it's because of the way that sidewalk is sunk down there. I mean, I know that we want to have them have it clear, but that then we're getting into something that's going to start to be costly for them and not just like a shovel to the mud every time it happens. So, I mean, if we do pass this one, like I get the ice, I get the snow and things that are more temporary, but things that are recurring where that's going to mean a bigger investment, I do hope we can tie this into some kind of assistance or funding because, putting in a higher sidewalk panel or even the kind of landscaping you might need to do to prevent that from happening and be costly. So that's just something for us to think about when we think about assistance programs.
Do I have a motion?
The 10 hours, is that, so I know that with like snow and ice, if you don't get to it right away, right, it becomes very hard to deal with. So I can see why we might want a shorter, more immediate time frame on that one. Does council have any interest on extending that time on any non-snow or ice thing where, maybe 24 hours or something, 48?
I think your point's well taken. Maybe grass clippings and leaves, 24 hours on that,
Yeah,
and the others 10 hours. That makes some sense.
just gives people a little more time.
I wonder though if we're making it more complex and therefore perhaps more confusing. Whereas if everything is 10 hours, it's easier to educate about the issue. Because if we say, well, you've got 24 hours for this thing, but only 10 hours for this other thing, I can see people being very confused by that because not everyone listens very well or remembers very well, right?
Is it helpful so right now for snow, if we get a complaint that there's snow on the walk, that I'm speaking for Public Works, we get the complaint and we go out and we see that it's been there and it snowed 2 days ago, right? We are going to leave a notice, or if it's a rental property, they automatically get an email. Then that gives them another day to have it cleared. If it's not cleared within a day, it's my understanding Public Works does it for them and assesses it back to the property, which you approve. So there's still a process. It's not that, again, it's been 10 hours since it snowed. Here's your citation. It's been 10 hours. Here's the code. We'll be back tomorrow to make sure it's been cleared. So we're already through our enforcement process, giving them
An extra
day or two. Yeah.
Honestly, I think given the safety concerns, that 10 hours plus whatever educational period we have following that is plenty to leave the sidewalk possibly dangerous for some people who need to have that walk cleared.
I like the consistency. That's a good point.
And we can always, if we screwed this thing up, you can always tell us we screwed this up. The community will tell us we screwed up. We can always come back later and fix this. I mean, I think a little bit of humility is warranted when we go about this. And so
we will be taking input on the ordinance when it comes back to us. So there will be an opportunity if people don't like what they see to tell us that.
Good point.
But I still need a motion.
I would move that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented the alternative language that prohibits accumulations of snow, ice, mud, gravel, grass clippings, leaves, etc., from remaining on a sidewalk for more than 10 hours after the cause of the accumulation.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Move on to open holes and excavations. This prohibits holes from existing for any period of time and exempts egress window wells, fire pits, active building permits, etc. Do we have any discussion or a possible motion other than what's on here?
What's the et cetera? I mean, sometimes I get what et cetera would,
I feel like there were,
but, like, what-
I'd have to look back at the survey responses. I think there were a couple other things that citizens mentioned
that you were like, oh yeah.
like man-made holes that are intended to be there that are okay.
Okay.
We won't put et cetera in the code.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks.
And other things as we deem necessary.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
a little vague.
Okay. Thank you.
And is this just in the front yard of the property?
As it stands, this would be anywhere on the property.
So what is our interest if someone has a young child that is digging a big hole in the backyard? What do we care about that?
Well, it's got to be a certain depth of hole, right? Or no?
It says 3 feet right now.
Okay. Your kid's digging a 3-foot hole and you're like,
But
What they call locate.
Well, don't we require fences around swimming pools in people's backyards?
I mean, our goal here has been so far in terms of safety and some aesthetics. I want to be a little bit cautious about if someone does something in their backyard, how concerned should we be about that?
Well, like I just said, don't we require fences around
that's
pools
different.
in the back? Why is that different? It's still in the backyard of somebody's property.
Because that's a civil matter then. This is a property maintenance code. If someone has an open swimming pool or something,
How's that different from an open hole?
Well,
I mean, other than that, it's probably a lot bigger than the average open hole that someone might have in their yard.
it's just, I'm trying to understand how big of an issue is this, that I can understand in the front yard, someone's making a delivery, FedEx is delivering a package. That makes sense that the public has a public interest in this.
Mhm.
But I'm just trying to understand what the evil is we're trying to ameliorate with this anywhere on the property.
So the only time I remember having holes was a property that we had actually declared dangerous, and it had several sinkholes around the foundation. So the property was already dangerous, but around the foundation were sinkholes that were extremely dangerous. But I hear what you're saying, that that's a civil matter. You're on someone else's property. It's not right along the sidewalk or on the way up to the door where one would have the right to be.
What about meter readers who are going onto the property, or people who are doing the, what is it, Iowa One call checks for
It's too late then.
utilities? No, well, okay. I mean, there are instances where there are other people who do cross yards.
And there are shared use paths that run through backyard areas as well.
I mean, and to cover it, like, say I'm building a fence and I dig a hole for my fence, but I haven't got the post yet, and it's taken me a while, right? I could put a sheet of plywood over that. That counts it covered.
So it can't be covered. Okay, because I mean, even digging a hole for a tree that didn't come in and now you're
Mhm.
waiting and it's beyond the number of days. So that can be covered, and once it's secured, you're okay. You don't have to fill the hole in and dig it back out again.
No.
Correct. It could be fenced in. We have water main breaks that you fence around them if you have an active hole open.
That seems fine.
Okay.
Do I have a motion?
I would move that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented this language that prohibits holes from existing and clarifying exceptions.
Is there a
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Leaving garbage receptacles at the curb. Garbage containers cannot be left at the curb for more than 48 hours and must be placed behind the front yard or indoors when not at the curb. So my concern on this is that I don't think it really should just be limited to garbage receptacles, because we do have recycling receptacles and yard waste receptacles and construction waste receptacles. So I'm not sure how we account for that, whether there is just a definition for disposal receptacle or something that needs to be included, but I would like to see us add to the definition of what we're dealing with here, because I think those pose the same kinds of challenges.
So
What-
go ahead. Sorry,
Go ahead.
you haven't.
No, you're fine.
Okay, I was just going to ask about behind the front yard or indoors. Is that an aesthetic accomplishment, or what are we trying to do? I understand getting it away from the curb, but now we're telling you the only places you can put it.
So right now we just say can't be at the curb.
Okay.
So you could theoretically put it on the other side of your sidewalk and leave it there.
Okay. yeah.
So I don't think, maybe some might want it for aesthetic reasons, they don't want to look at it by your garage or whatever. Our intent is to give them direction where to put it.
Okay. So, but this is not safety. This is something else.
I would say that around the sidewalk and the street area, it's safety. If they blow over and you can't pass through the sidewalk, or now it's spilling garbage everywhere, those would be concerns. I don't know at what point we get up into your yard where it's no longer a safety issue. So for us, it was just easiest to say, bring it back past the back of the house. So
Okay. Thank you.
just to give them a line to get to.
Does this, what about freebie stuff that people put at their curb? Is that, currently, it would be under the junk bid. I mean, it's not really junk though, sometimes if someone else wants it. So I don't know if do we have any standards about?
Yeah, so you might recall our couch ordinance.
Yeah.
That prohibits furniture or items that are supposed to be used indoors from being left outdoors ever.
On any
Um,
property or rental only?
Any property.
Hmm.
And the only exception is within an enclosed porch. So if you have, even if it's a screened in porch, that's okay. But anywhere else on the property that's outside, you cannot have indoor furniture.
How many complaints do we get on rental properties for garbage containers being left out for more than 24 hours?
34.
In 4 years?
I think there are a lot of people who have given up reporting it because it really is challenging to report it and then have staff do something about it and then wait while the residents don't do something about it. And so there are a lot of people in my neighborhood who just don't report it anymore because it's kind of a losing battle.
I would also say that for us, one of the biggest challenges is that there are so many different trash pickup days in town. And some people have twice a week service. So it's really hard to tell when it went out there. So yeah, this is really an educational opportunity. Never issued a citation for this, never had to move anybody's receptacle. Usually a door hanger lets them know, hey, get it back. But enforcement wise, I think it would be a nightmare for us to enforce.
So why
Oh, yeah.
do we want this?
South Campus
In
neighborhood.
any rental code or property maintenance?
I would say South Campus neighborhood would say it's a health issue. We get raccoons and crows and possums and I don't know what all crawling into the receptacles that are left at the curb for days.
But they'll do that if it's at the side of the house too.
I want there to be an education opportunity. I mean, that's the thing. If you don't live over there, you don't understand.
But
That's-
again, you're probably mostly rental was where you're having the issue. So
Keep it with the
So
rent.
it's not all rental properties that leave their receptacles out.
Mm.
Trust me on that.
well, if arguing that it's a problem in South Campus and then saying that it's owner occupied.
There are owners who occupy in South Campus.
I know. I bet they pull their garbage. I don't know.
They
I'm kind of
don't.
with Andrew on this.
Not all of them do. But I think that this is a tool to allow us to educate. If we don't have the ordinance, we don't have the tool. So that is my view on it.
Sarah, I have a question pragmatically. Are there situations, because the receptacles have to be brought in inside or behind the front of the house? So are there situations where the configuration of the house doesn't really allow that? And so they bring the garbage can up to the side of the house. So it's not by the street, but there's really no way for them. Maybe their garage, they don't have a garage, or it's placed in the back of the house, but there's really not a way. Maybe they're in a duplex situation and there's really not a place for them to put the receptacle. Is that a concern that we should think about with this language?
Yeah, I can't think of a specific example where I've had that, but I think it could certainly happen. Maybe like twin homes or attached homes. I don't know. Or some people have fences right next to the garage that potentially they couldn't get back there. Yeah, it's possible.
So is our concern having the trash receptacles at the street? Do we care so much whether they're located in the garage or on the side of the house? I'm just trying to think through whether we're creating another challenge with creating an expectation that some property owners simply don't have a possibility of putting the receptacle.
My main concern is getting them away from the street and the sidewalk.
So
So
it could be a certain
distance from,
back from sidewalk
right away?
and street. And I did look at the 2021 report, and that was the low end. There were 5 average complaints per year between 2017 and 2020. So it is still one of those that's pretty low.
again, I know
Since
many
20
people who refuse to phone in these kinds of concerns
Mhm.
because it doesn't help,
Mhm.
really. So do I have a motion?
Nope.
If I don't hear a motion from someone else, I will make the motion and we'll see if it goes anywhere. I would move that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits containers from being left at the curb for more than 48 hours and requires them to be stored at least 10 feet from the right of way. Is that enough to get it?
Mhm.
At least 10 feet from the right of way.
I'll second.
Discussion. If there's no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Man, we got shut down.
Did- did-
That was a
that
hammer.
in here too?
Sorry.
Wow,
Hammer.
I can't believe it. Come to my house, live on my street, and you will understand.
Can you put a note, summarily defeated?
Yes, the motion did not carry. So is there an alternative motion to be made on this issue? Not even a motion that we drop this from our discussions.
I would
You want a motion that we don't talk about it anymore?
second.
Well, yeah, because I
Yes.
think otherwise it could end up in the
Okay.
ordinance. So what was that?
Yeah, I think if you don't want it, we want a motion saying that you don't want it.
Okay.
I would move that we
Don't-
not talk about this anymore.
That we don't want this.
They're not talking about it. What's the,
That we don't want to pursue adding this to the ordinance.
Second.
I like the way you frame that. Makes me want to just talk about it just to be.
No,
Focus on
please don't. So second, it's been moved and seconded
we've been working
that,
hard at
that
this.
we cut this garbage receptacles portion out of the potential ordinance. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Nay.
so, oh, excuse me. So just to make clear, that's removed now. There's no discussion on receptacle placement.
Correct. And then
Our
can I have
timeframe.
clarification if you would still like it to be in the rental code?
That's fine.
That's fine.
I move we leave it as is in the rental code.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we leave it as is in the rental code. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Allowing garbage, junk, and yard waste to be stored prohibits refuse, garbage, junk, etc. from being stored for more than 72 hours.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on that?
How subjective is this one? So say I took apart a piano I once had and I still have the soundboard in my backyard because like I could maybe use that for a trellis someday if my housemate wants to. And I know it's a complaint basis, right? So my neighbors would have to care, which they don't. But if they did, and you came over and you were like, hey, you've got junk. And I was like, no, I'm going to use that. Like how much subjectivity is there?
So I think if someone said that to me while I was out there, I would say, then here's your time frame to use it. So we have people that use toilets as planters.
Sure.
Right? So
Good point.
to them, they're using it, right? So I'm not going to say that it's junk and you need to get rid of it. So
Okay.
if you are going to use it, show me that you're going to use it. If not,
Okay.
put it inside.
Okay.
Other
And
questions?
I just have a question. When we're talking about some of these things, this is applying only to residential, not commercial properties, correct?
It would be my intent to apply it to all properties.
And the yard waste, I know in some of the comments, some people indicated, oh gosh, I do it a couple weeks ahead of the free day. And so the 72 hours would not help someone who's accumulating in order to take advantage of that. So that's included in what we're asking you to bring back here.
So there's
Allowing garbage, junk, and
I
yard
need a-
waste to be stored.
the yard waste section in the ordinance right now allows you to retain yard waste on your property for up to 7 days. You cannot keep it any longer unless composting is being conducted.
Unless compost.
So it does give you
So
a
the
week to
current
keep it.
ordinance already identifies that.
Yep, and that would remain.
Mhm.
But if you were to tell us once again that you have a plan that you're waiting for the free yard waste day,
Okay.
In fact, we tell people about the free yard waste
Okay.
day. Like it might be a little bit longer, but please use this so you can get rid of it.
Okay.
And
That's helpful.
I have a question. I really like this motion. This is probably the best thing we've done yet, is this one, just to rescue some people. But in terms of effective, if someone has got quite a bit of material, this is going to go through a process of approval. Do we want to give a little more lead time on some of these that may take a little more of a lift for the owners to bring the property into compliance?
Yep. So for our enforcement, if I send the first notice, it's usually a 10 to 14 day time frame that they get. If they contact us and say, I have a plan, I have someone coming to do this for me, I need help, my family's coming down in 2 weeks for this event, let me do it, then we will extend the time frame out and check back with them then. So we really are trying to educate them. Once they learn what it is, if they give us a plan, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt and work with them on their plan. If at any point they stop, now we'll keep going with our enforcement process, but we really want to work towards compliance. It's easier for me to give them an extra week or two to work on it than it is to go through the enforcement and citation process. So.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Do I have a motion on this?
I think we have one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I made the motion.
Oh, you made the motion already?
I
No.
second.
Wow. Okay.
We were on it.
Thank you. I got lost.
That's right.
So it's been moved and seconded that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits refuse, garbage, junk from being stored for more than 72 hours. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Allowing stagnant water to pool prohibits stagnant water from existing for more than 48 hours. Do I have discussion or a motion on this?
So one of the pictures that you showed looked as if the water might have been pooling because there had been a lot of rain. So would that homeowner then have to go purchase dirt and fill it in order not to, yeah, the one on the upper right? What would be the remedy if we know they have a yard that just is prone after it rains?
Yeah, we could work with our stormwater folks in Public Works to help them identify some solutions. Again, this wouldn't be a prohibition until it's been there for 48 hours, and then we would start working with them. So if it's going to be an ongoing problem, I'd prefer to have Public Works work with them on a solution than continuing to go out and try to resolve the issue that way. So yeah, I don't know what that means, if they need a regrade and we can do something to help them with that. But yeah, I think we would try to help them out first.
And
what
I-
about,
Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, that reminds me, what about stormwater retention ponds? And I mean, so in some cases, our stormwater codes are requiring people to make giant pools of stagnant water, right?
Trapped stagnant water that does not circulate.
Yeah. And so I guess that's where I'm,
So we could probably just add an exception from.
Yeah, you accept
them.
that. That's all you have to do.
right.
Approved stormwater retention areas are
Right.
exempt from this.
But I mean, I guess what I'm really asking is what's the difference? So we'd exempt it, but like what if someone had a yard that was prone to a lot of rainfall and they had a miniature version of a stormwater retention pond on just scaled down from a larger property, but for a smaller property. When a big property is building a stormwater retention pond, are there any standards about how far that water has to be away from dwellings so that mosquitoes don't do their thing.
I'm not sure about those standards, but I know that there is a lot that goes into it. They're approved on those properties. They're approved on site plans. They're planned, right? They're not a result of neglect, I would say is maybe the difference. So if I went out and someone said, well, I'm doing my own stormwater management, maybe I would talk with stormwater and say, is this an approved practice? Is this the best way to do this? And then work with them. If that's what they're doing and it's working and it's effective, then I probably wouldn't have much jurisdiction.
So if we said something like, prohibits stagnant water from remaining on property for more than 48 hours, with the exception of purposeful stormwater retention or something like that.
Mhm.
Are you
We-
purposeful or approved?
I would think you'd want to approve
Approved,
stormwater retention.
Perhaps. That's
Yeah, because then I think we could work with Public Works to approve it.
get it approved after the
Yeah.
fact if it were proper. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, that's
And I had one follow-up question. This one, somebody's got a decorative little fish pond in the back for landscaping. It doesn't have any kind of fountain, so it would probably fit the definition of water that's not moving. Is that what we're trying to capture here?
Don't they usually aerate
Don't they have
those?
an aerator to keep?
Don't they aerate those for the fish?
I would, but what if?
Well, if it's not stagnant, then it would be okay. But
Yeah, I would think if you weren't and it was just sitting there, like if you did have one of those and maybe a new owner moved in and didn't want it and it's just pooling water, we wouldn't still call it a koi pond. We would say it's stagnant water.
I think that is a good question though, because I don't know that you would need an aerator for certain types of fish.
So we've already exempted.
Oh, koi ponds. Good. It's
Yeah,
on there.
we've exempted those in what our draft is.
Okay.
So we have some examples. I don't know that it covers them all.
Sure. Okay.
Um,
Well, that's good.
Do I have a motion on this?
I would move that we direct staff to add to the ordinance this language that prohibits stagnant water from remaining on a property for more than 48 hours, except for approved stormwater management.
Second.
Okay, so, but that does not account for the koi ponds,
He said that was
et
in
cetera.
there.
It's in there. So this isn't the exact this isn't the exact code language you're adding to an ordinance.
No, I know. But then it doesn't exclude what you've got in your draft, because what Bronwyn just put forward as a motion just had the exception of approved
So
stormwater.
we'll take that motion
And
and
add
add the exemption to what we
Great.
already have.
Okay, so all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Conditions that harbor vermin, staff is recommending here that we eliminate this section. Possible motion, direct staff to not include the vermin section in the ordinance being presented on June 27th.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Junk vehicles eliminates the 15-day prohibition on operable vehicles. Do we have discussion or a motion on this?
And also clarifies the definition of junk. Did you say that that was part of this as well?
That's already in the ordinance. So the definition of junk and those exemptions, the vehicle covers, all of that are already in the ordinance. If you want changes to them, you can propose them now, but the only thing staff is recommending is to eliminate the 15-day prohibition for storage of operable vehicles.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And this is storage as in, it can also be on your driveway. Okay. I would move that we remove the 15-day prohibition on storage of operable vehicles from the ordinance being presented on June 27th.
Second.
And I'm sorry, could you clarify? I know we've covered this. So someone has a vehicle and they haven't been able to get the car, it's going to require substantial repairs. It's been a month. Is that vehicle in violation of this ordinance?
It would depend on what the repairs are. So the junk vehicle definition has very specific criteria, like you're missing the steering wheel, you have 2 or more tires gone. if it meets any of those, yes, it would fall under the junk vehicle condition.
So
But
the-
again, if they're saying a part is coming, please work with me, then we would say when,
And they would always have the option to throw a cover on it.
or put it in a garage, behind a fence. Yep.
Uh, Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Dense growth of vegetation prohibits vegetation that restricts ingress or egress of a structure and removes dents. Do we have either discussion or a motion on this?
I would move that we direct staff to add this alternative language that prohibits vegetation that impedes ingress or egress and removes the word dense.
Is there a second?
Second.
And we think that that's clear enough that this means a door as opposed to windows.
Yes.
I'm just asking, is this?
I can add that to clarify in the ordinance if you want us to specify that this is doors.
I think since we have egress windows in the basement, it would probably be wise to add door,
Okay.
but it doesn't really change the motion.
Well, my argument would be that I think the egress window in the basement should still be clear, right? So, because that is the only secondary means of egress for the basement, in addition to getting out the door, you'd want fire to be able to
Okay,
get into that egress. Because we don't go back and, post building check on any of the bedroom windows egress ability. It's not the word, but those I'm less concerned with. But I would want this
The
to mean the
basement
doors and the basement if egress window if it has one.
So
okay.
we would say doors or below grade egress windows.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Exterior structural requirements. Requires structures to be free from significant structural defect. Do we have discussion on this or a motion?
And could you clarify on this one? The house I have in mind is becoming a squirrel bird hotel. And so would that be included in this definition or not?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Do I have a motion?
so moved.
Second?
Second.
So motion has been made and seconded to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the initial proposed language, which was requires structures to be free from significant structural defect. Do we have any discussion?
There'll be a lot of happy people in Ames when we pass this.
Sort of, but I think also this is the biggest of the cost impact ones. And so I think we need to also be, and I know we will be, right? I hope we will be when we look at assistance programs and volunteer programs and things like that. Because I think this is the one above all the others that represents the most cost. And I know that, there's folks out there who would maintain their properties if they could, but they're unable to. And so, if folks are listening at home, this is not one we take lightly. It is important to us it's important to me anyway, and us, I think, that we maintain the integrity of our housing stock too, though. And so there's a greater public good that we're protecting here. And we're not just trying to step in to someone's private business or, private life, right? And tell them what to do. But really, we're trying to protect our public good there with our housing stock. And I think we all recognize that. And I know, I just want to, if anyone is listening, I want them to know that we are sensitive, that this is going to be the biggest one to lift in terms of cost for folks, and that we will definitely examine assistance programs and volunteer programs, whatever we can, to try to ease that burden on folks who might not be able to afford to do these sorts of improvements.
And that some of this has to do with their safety as well.
Mhm.
And so,
True.
yeah.
And also you will see, so when we bring back the ordinance next week, you will see what free from maintained of means, like how we've defined that. And if there's something in there that you don't want to deal with, we can take that piece out.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have, I guess we have a motion. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Vacant unsecured structures prohibits unoccupied buildings from being unsecured, exempts accessory structures on properties with the primary structure where the primary structure is occupied. Do I have discussion on this or the possible motion?
So I didn't sense that this was I was not aware that this was a pressing issue, but if this is a tool that staff feels would be important, I would move the motion as drafted.
Is there a second?
A second.
So it's been moved and seconded to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits unoccupied buildings from being unsecured and allows accessory structures to remain unsecured if the primary structure is occupied. Do we have further
Can I
discussion?
just make a clarification for staff? So when you use the term unsecured, does that mean you can have broken out windows? Want that council to understand that?
No, you
You just
can't
mean-
have them, right?
Okay, so secured truly means the locking of the doors, not having openings in the buildings itself, right? If a window's broken, a hole in the roof, you have to secure that. If you have to,
Correct.
I just want to make sure they understand. It's when you mean unsecured, you mean just locking of the facility itself.
I mean, any way that anyone could get in. So both of those, that example with the broken window, that's unsecured. People can get into the structure.
But you said if it's occupied, the primary residence is occupied, that secondary building can have broken windows and be unsecured.
Yes. If it's
Because the
primary
occupant's
building.
taking responsibility.
I just want to make sure they understand that. You understand? The secondary
You mean the
building-
accessory structure. So
Accessory
say I have a
structure.
house and I live in the house and it's just fine, but my garage has
has broken windows, holes in the side, whatever. Just allow it, correct?
As long as
Mhm.
it's
I
structurally.
just want to make sure they understand what you're
it doesn't-
saying. It's not just the locking of the door. It's the structure itself can have holes in it, have openings in it.
Yeah, but so I think that then that would go back to the maintenance
Mhm.
section
The structural
um,
defect.
where we would require windows. Right? It can't just be open to the elements. We don't want it raining. We don't want animals going in. So that would be part of that structural requirement. Really, the intent of this section is to keep vagrants out so that we don't have crime and fires in them.
Just want to make sure you understand.
And by secured, you mean doors locked or shut?
I would prefer locked.
Well, I was just thinking through, I saw this top example and I'm like, what's secure really about a window if there's a brick next to the building? I mean, like, so a door being shut or a window being there are kind of the same level of security.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Which we wouldn't normally know if the building is unsecured. If the door is closed, we would not go up and check it to make sure that it was
Sure.
locked.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
But if we get a complaint that, like I recall one time, for example, the police contacted us because they had someone that was stealing from Hy-Vee and they were running to a building across the street that had an open door that they were getting into a basement. Well, nobody knew they were until the police found them. So they would want us to help make sure that that door gets secured.
I see.
Okay.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Graffiti. Requires graffiti to be removed within 7 days of notification by the enforcement officer. Do I have discussion or the possible motion?
And you have a definition for graffiti, correct?
Yep. That's the definition. And just to clarify again, that it is prohibited on rental properties currently.
And again, I liked it because it, it has about the consent. So if a property owner is liking whatever got put on there, they could choose to keep it. But in your example about like a gang symbol, for example, if that got graffitied on a building and we went and we tried the education piece and they were like, I don't care, let it stay anyway, then that still counts as with their consent, right? I mean, it would stay then, whether as
Currently.
troubling as someone might find. Okay. Just curious. Okay.
And this is on commercial properties as well. So I have an alley by my office, and
Yes.
there's a lot of graffiti in that alley.
Yep. So that's our concern right now. I've walked Main Street many times to log graffiti. And unfortunately, the only ones that we have the ability to do anything with are those that have units in the upstairs as rental units. So we would if it's important enough to get rid of on those, why not the neighboring structure also? Or if it's not, vice versa, if it's not important, then maybe we don't need it in the rental code either. We don't have a huge issue with it on rental properties.
Just one pragmatic point. Sometimes it's very difficult to remove these markings. If they're painted on brick, it's very difficult to do that. So it's maybe a challenge. But this is going to be a learning curve for our downtown business owners because there's a lot of gang graffiti in our alleys.
They have the choice to leave it there. We wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
They
But
do
now
have the choice to leave
Currently,
it there.
but not if we approve this.
Oh, they still will have the
But they
choice
will
to
have the
leave
choice.
it.
Oh,
there.
if they say they
They
consent.
Say,
If they,
If they say
remove
they
it, won't be
consent.
cited because they'll just say we want it to stay.
Yeah.
They're protected that way.
So I'm
Well, then are we any worse off than we are
I
now?
don't know.
mm,
I mean, it's the chance to have the education piece, right?
Mhm.
So with the properties now that you haven't been successful with on Main Street in removing graffiti, they know and they're like, I'm just not going to deal with it, or you haven't even had the chance to say to them, hey,
I think when we first logged it, we might have worked with downtown to send out a general letter explaining it and explaining what the requirements were. But that hasn't been for several years. And we don't get complaints of them often. I think it was very low on the complaint list.
and this would be complaint based as well.
Mhm.
So not one you'd be logging necessarily anymore,
Right.
unless you were directed to.
Yeah, we were mostly logging it so they could track the symbols and where people were moving, not necessarily as a violation.
Sure. Okay.
Do I have a motion? I'm going to move that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that prohibits graffiti from remaining for longer than 7 days after notification. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion carries. Recreational vehicle parking. Staff added trailer to the existing list. RVs would not have a time limit on storage behind the front yard as long as they are on approved surface and not used for habitation. Do we have further discussion or a motion on this?
I like what staff has done with this. I am curious, Sarah, if you have any thoughts. Some of the RVs truly are enormous. And so I think we should be reasonable in this. And so to have no limit has had some huge impacts on neighborhoods who have to look at this very, very large RV. In other words, if it was a structure, they couldn't build that structure. We would never give them a building permit. But somehow, because it's an RV, then they can park this ginormous RV by their house that everybody else has to live with. So it's an aesthetic issue, that is true, but it's in some ways it's bypassing the building code that would sort of limit structures on properties. So is it possible? I'm fine with some level of RVs, but there's no limit now.
Jane did legal have a size when we were having the bus discussion of what a length? I don't recall. Maybe that's something
She
we
did,
use.
we did discuss some options on that.
I don't remember what
I
it.
think 20 feet was what
40.
we ended up
40?
discussing the most.
20?
20 feet in length.
Is that all?
We didn't.
20 doesn't seem like that much to me.
Yeah.
So it's a little difficult to talk about these kind of distance lengths without seeing some examples. If we made a motion to do this, and then maybe I ask on a second motion to ask the staff to come back and give us some examples, and then we could consider whether we want to add a length. So we get this in place, and then we could consider something in terms of a length limit.
And I guess my concern is still that depending on where you live, you may not be able to put your trailer anywhere else other than in the driveway. And
It's called a
so-
storage unit.
Well, yeah, but then that's
Not everyone
Money.
can afford that.
Well, that's sort of a cost. If you're going to have a $150,000, $200,000 RV,
It's true.
you can find a place to store that besides your side yard that I have to look at for the next 20 years.
This doesn't necessarily say that they're expensive RVs or trailers or boats.
I think that
it
one up
could,
there
it could
is
be
Well, that makes my case even more. Then I'm looking at a crummy RV.
oh, now we got classist aestheticism here.
Now, I'm not
Well,
sure how looking at a crummy RV is worse than looking at garbage cans out at the curb for
But-
2 weeks at a
but
time.
I-
So this is, my
I-
concern is the length of time that something is parked there. And so that 72 hours that is in the ordinance now gets removed, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't have that anymore. So if you wanted to establish a time frame, you could. Length would be an option. If you're saying you don't want it right next to the side of your house, maybe they have to comply with the same setbacks accessory structures would. So if it was, a shed has to be 3 feet in, maybe your camper has to be 3 feet in. And if you can't do that, then it can't be there. I can't think of many instances where there would be enough room on the side of the house to fit something that large plus a 3-foot setback. So maybe that's an option. We can look at different, if you're okay having the concept, maybe we keep that. And then I can look at other jurisdictions and see if there's anything else they do to restrict size or type.
I'm guessing other communities have addressed the size of the vehicle. I'll go ahead and start with the motion that I move that we adopt the language as presented by staff.
Just as a quick FYI, Cedar Rapids prohibits 20 feet in length. Iowa City is also 20 feet. And so we discussed 20 feet when we discussed this issue in March.
And that was on a street, correct?
Yeah.
That is
Mhm.
correct.
Yes. So these could be parked on the street as well,
Well, they would have to be parked on the street if
if we didn't allow.
we didn't have a place behind the house or within whatever setback. And I guess to me, that seems odd that we're okay with saying, no, you've got to put your RV on the street rather than, no, you've got to keep it on your property, on your parking area. Because if people are trying to get in and out of their garages, that may actually be incentive for them not to park the RV there for that long. I don't know. I mean, it just seems that way to me. I have no personal experience with it. But we have a motion on the table to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the alternative language that allows RVs and trailers to be parked behind the front yard as long as they are on the approved service and not used for habitation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay?
Nay.
And then I'll follow this up. Move that we ask staff to come back with some possible options for lengths of RVs, and if possible, to look at some jurisdictions of peer cities.
Is there a second? Motion fails.
I mean, I think I'm just going to offer this. We had an opportunity tonight to tighten up things. People in the community are not happy with these large RVs. park next to their home, this was an opportunity. We could at least have a conversation and look at them.
Well, I think we did have the conversation, at least for now.
I think when we
So-
get the draft back, there's more opportunity for
Mhm.
input then.
Yep. And looks like it's going to be under discussion next week. So turf grass on private property, same as initial, only restricts turf grasses.
Will it, so it only restricts turf grasses, and then will it so clarify or specify native grasses can be any height? guess
Yes, I don't remember what exactly it said.
It just, maybe to just make it real clear for people.
Assuming that the native grasses aren't in the right of way within 1 foot of the sidewalk or the street, right?
Yeah, I think it's just that one sentence. So we could clarify that it's on private property, not in the right of way, and doesn't include that.
Okay.
Add that clarification.
Do I have a motion?
I would move that we direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the proposed language that prohibits turf grasses only from exceeding 12 inches in height beyond the right of way.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Appeal process. Staff recommends the addition of an appeal board comprised of neighborhood representatives to ensure citizens have a voice. Discussion or a motion?
Can I revisit that last one? Not the motion itself, but the concept on turf grass. Is there any interest in allowing an exception for no mow May?
I assume that we would, instead of codifying that council would make a decision each year about suspending the ordinance during May if we chose to do that.
Okay.
So that each council would have the decision-making power about whether they supported no mow May or not.
Right.
I mean, maybe you all think differently.
No, I like that idea of no mow May, so I wouldn't want our staff to get called out on complaints for something that the concept is okay. So
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this. I think people should mow their grass when it starts growing.
Well, I think that that's something that can be dealt with on a yearly basis
That's fine.
by the council that is sitting at the time.
okay.
Because it's easy enough to suspend the enforcement of that ordinance for a specified period of time.
Sure.
All right, the appeals process. Do I have discussion or a motion on the appeals process?
Move that we adopt the proposed language.
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th, the process establishing an appeal board and procedures. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. The abatement tool. Staff recommends creating the abatement tool as an alternative to issuing a citation. It is not required to be used, but would give staff additional options when a quicker response is needed. Further discussion or a motion on this?
Move the proposed language.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to direct staff to add to the ordinance being presented on June 27th an abatement tool that would authorize staff the choice to abate nuisances when not resolved through education and established enforcement procedures. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. That is all of the proposed motions. Do we need a motion to continue investigating the incentives or city support for programs like a repair and care or something like that? Or is that kind of aside from this once we approve the ordinance, if we approve it?
I think what you're gonna find is, you're probably not gonna like to hear this, but you're gonna have 4 or 5 initiatives before you seeking funding. So it could be, you can say, let's set up a pot of money here. We have the initiation of the climate action plan in our steps. We're gonna need a pot of money.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about affordable housing, where we talk about affordable, a pot of money. And then perhaps just workforce housing.
think it's going to be a very interesting budget cycle as we start in a few months to start talking about that, because what the state legislature did, our hands are tied and then we're limited in the amount of revenue we can generate. So I don't want you to make those decisions in a piecemeal fashion, since they're all priorities for you. They're going to have to come together, and in your budget time, you're going to have to make a decision, because it's not about just financing one-time money. I'm sure this is an ongoing commitment. So you know, ongoing source of funds. So we can certainly explore all those things, but I think the final decision are going to have to be made at budget time when you see them all together. So we can certainly look at that. Certainly volunteer groups we could start working at, and talk about helping people, what a pot might look like and the criteria for giving it. And do you care about income levels, you know, if we're going to give out assistance on these or not? We can start developing that. But I think in all reality, I think you're going to have to make these decisions at one time with all these requests for pots of money before you.
But could we direct staff to at least have before budget time that background so that we know how other cities have done
Oh,
it,
absolutely.
so that we can be ready to have that discussion at that point?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
Do you have a motion ready, Anita?
Yes, I would like to move that staff look at some of these programs that do provide resources for homeowners that need assistance, and be able to provide us with some information about how those are funded.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. I'd like to make a friendly amendment, not only funded, but also administered.
And
I don't want to take over administering this. So to me, it'd be ideal if we could partner with an organization like what was it, the Story County
Trust fund.
Trust Fund has an existing structure for administering, and I'm open to what that is, but
Okay.
I think we accept a friendly amendment on that.
Yes.
All
And I
right.
second.
So we have a friendly amendment. Jeremy, did you get that? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much for the
Yes.
comprehensive coverage of this, and I guess we'll see you again next week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. I would like to take a 5-minute recess in between this and our next discussion.
I know.
We'll bring the meeting back into session. As soon as we're actually on screen again. There we go. So we're back from our break. And we're moving on to our low and moderate income housing discussion. So I will turn this over to Vanessa and Kevin.
Good evening, Council. So we're here with this report to address one of your council goals, and one of the tasks that was put before the Planning and Housing Department was to come forward to talk about a housing strategy targeted to low and moderate income housing. So we are not at this point really addressing market-based housing. I think there's some other issues that may relate to that. We're not really talking about availability of single-family homes, apartment construction rates, any of those types of things. We're really trying to focus in on the lower income housing, which is not typically constructed by the market. So there's three things that you asked of us to put into a staff report, to have conversation tonight. Those three things are to talk about, are there code impediments Are there standardized incentives that might promote development of affordable housing? And then a specific strategy would be, is there initial land acquisition that the city might be able to undertake to further housing goals in the future as well? So that's really one specific strategy versus incentives could be a strategy itself, and there's different ways of looking at that. So there's a lot of data that could be given to you. So I very selectively provided information to you. So if there's issues that are not covered, and that's things that you want as follow-up memos or something that's offline, let us know and we can package that up for you. There's a tremendous amount of data between the census and some other survey information that's out there to give you a good picture of kind of what housing conditions are, what production is like compared to national levels and also in Ames. So a couple of things just to look at the background for the city, a little bit of the housing inventory. So we have, we're going to, for the most part, rely on the American Community Survey, which is a census product. It has the most details available in terms of, there's two different products. One's a 1-year sample and one's a 5-year sampling. 5-year has a broader range of information. It's not as current, but it's more reliable in terms of its margin of error is less because it's not trying to be as accurate as the cutting edge of what's happening in this immediate moment, versus 1-year projections are about 1 year behind and they're a real quick snapshot with less sampling involved. So take all the census data. It's a little unfair how this gets represented. I just have to, if you actually look at the census tables, it gives you that margin of error. There can be significant margins of error for certain sampling things for real specific details that are not widely sampled. So most of the information here is pretty core information, which has fairly good or fairly low margin of error to it. But if you really start to dig into the census and try to look at, income by age in this particular housing type, it's going to get a real significant margin of error quickly. So within the city, we have about 25,000 occupied housing units according to the census. There's about 27,500 in total. So that's assuming a vacancy rate. And when you look at the census data, the owner occupied vacancy rate is well under 1%, closer to 0.6, I believe. And then the rental household one is the one that's higher at about 7%. Now, again, these are sampling from not this year. This is from 2 years ago. So you have some other influences in our lives in 2021 and 2020. So it's still the best available information, but just take it with a little bit of grain of salt of what that time frame was when we were talking about COVID and just different environments that people were living in and what they were doing. So probably the more interesting thing there is that we are about 60% rental, 40% ownership in the city. That is not anywhere close to the national averages. We are a university town. We are heavily impacted by the university population when you look at our census data. Even more so, if you look back to 2010 and the decade before that, our percentage of rental has grown because for a while, obviously ISU increased tremendously in the number of students, and that population is the ones that got housed in the last decade. And then as the enrollment starts to go down, some of that percentage will change a little bit. But the rental housing units are still here, right? They're just not necessarily occupied by students. So Plan 2040 acknowledge that. We're not trying to replicate the past in Plan 2040. We have a goal, and again, we're not going to necessarily force this to be, but our goal is to flip that around and produce about 55% of the units as ownership housing and 45% as rental. And the reason being, because we're always going to have a higher rental demand probably than the national average because of students. So we still need to have a very healthy rental market to allow for average households that want to rent or need to rent, as well as accommodating students. So even that 45% is still well above national averages, but we're trying to put that into account for our planning to make sure that we're trying to promote the ownership side of it, but also accommodate a very healthy amount of rental at the same time. Now, income levels, Vanessa's here to really talk about federal programs, understanding income limits and how some of those things impact who she can qualify, how people get qualified into households for rental assistance or even for buying homes. But it's really interesting when you look at what the census is tabulating for our income level. So we have a median income level of just under $65,000 for all types of households. And this is where it gets really important when you talk about what's the distinction between a student-influenced household and a non-student. So for me, the simplest way to distinguish student influenced information from non is to look at family statistics instead of household statistics. And you'll see what we have quoted here. The family average median income is 105,000. So that starts to give you a much truer picture of the wealth and the income in Ames as it actually relates to the real housing prices that you see for especially owner occupied housing. Now, the ratio is still incredibly high in terms of housing costs for owner occupied versus that income level. That's also a national trend. So when you start to compare our family incomes to national family incomes, we're higher than national family incomes, and our housing costs are very similar. So if you kind of isolate into where that is, we're very similar in that production of market-based housing and in terms of income levels. It's that lower income level that we have a lot more demand for that is not exactly what's accounted for across the country. And you can see we did quote that one. So that non-family household is at 35,673. So that is a very, very low number. When you start to look at housing costs in relation to that income, you can see why it shows as a housing burden very quickly when you're talking about an income in the 35,000 range. So as we looked at that, we also put into the table how we use our federal programs. You have the home income limits described there. So that gives you a sense of what we are allowed to use in terms of maximum incomes when we use federal programs for benefits to people. And you can see how that scales to household size as well. So what we believe and what we describe in this report is that we as the city should be focused in that 30 to 60% of income range, although you can go up to 80 when you start to look at the 80. I think we've said this in the past, as you approach 80, you're getting really into the lower end of market. And are you really providing affordable housing, or are you just facilitating quicker or a little bit more access to housing for people that could already achieve that on their own? So one of the definitions we need from tonight is an understanding of what our priorities are in terms of household types to support. And that's where we're saying that 30 to 60 and really that 30 to 50 is really what we think is important from a rental support option. Any questions on income levels, any of those types of things about the statistics? One other thing that when you talk about what's the availability of income restricted units, for the most part, we're talking about LIHTC projects. And we quoted in here, there's 501 of those units available in the city out of 14,700 rental units. So you can see the amount of dedicated, restricted units made available to people, typically under 60% AMI, not very many in the city. And then the Section 8 vouchers, they're also quoted in here just being just over 300. Again, not a huge number for a city for what we have to work with. Now, we don't administer the Section 8 voucher program. That's through SIRHA, so it's a multi-county entity that is distributing them in multiple places, not just here.
Have those numbers significantly declined in the last 5 years?
The number of voucher holders that we have in the city,
Yeah.
actually, they've gone up.
Huh. So, well, wait a minute. I shouldn't ask it that way. We've got the voucher holders. Are they able to find accommodation, or have the number of accommodations gone down?
Number of accommodations have gone down a little bit. Because of the increase in the LIHTC unit, we've got more voucher holders in the LIHTC, but not just out in regular units. If that makes sense. That's why the voucher number went up, because of the LIHTC units, not because of available units outside of LIHTC.
And do we know how many more people we might need to accommodate at this point, or we just know there's not enough housing?
We just know there's not enough,
Okay.
and where families end up going outside of Ames that really wanted to be here.
Okay, we have that information. Okay, thank you.
So one of those elements of talking about housing affordability is to talk about what percentage of your income is devoted to housing. And again, national rule of thumb would be 30%. And that's, again, what housing programs have to use also when trying to establish whether a household is eligible for that unit. Can they afford to really be in that unit? And how does that match up with other rent levels? And again, as you get closer to market, people make different choices about how they want to spend discretionary income. So if I'm earning that $105,000 as a median family income, I may choose to forego some other discretionary spending to be able to get to a house that's maybe a little bit of a stretch. Or I understand that I might be able to earn more money in the next few years. So again, I'm gonna cope with that for a couple of years versus someone that's in a lower income bracket, doesn't have as much discretionary income, and really is being pressed to live to use their finances to just cover housing and not be able to necessarily get to the other things they would like to have in their household. So those are things, again, that kind of relate to where are we going to focus our energy on, where are we going to focus our resources towards the lower incomes versus the moderate income levels. And again, we didn't end up talking about market-based housing in this report, but if we were to just walk you through what is on the market now as new construction, there's not any new construction that would be deemed affordable to a low and moderate income household. So the lowest priced market-based home that I believe I saw on the market is an attached townhome at $350,000. So that's brand new construction. It's not what you can buy as a resale or anything like that. So that is not affordable to anybody that's making the median income within Ames. Now, when you get to the family income, now you're at a ratio of just about 3.5 to that median family income, and then it starts to make economic sense. When you compare it to 64,000, it doesn't make economic sense. So again, it's going to be how do you look at that group that you're trying to support, and what are we trying to get as a product of housing out of this?
Can you talk about the 30% target for what a household is spending on housing? Is that just rent, or is that rent and basic utility, and then electricity, water, and then basic utilities?
It's rent and utilities.
Okay, and utilities. And in this day and age, do they consider telecommunications in that?
No.
No. Okay. So it'd just be electricity, gas, water.
Mhm.
Okay.
So as we again, one of the outcomes we need to talk about tonight is our focus, what income ranges, and then also maybe as that income range relates to ownership or rental housing. So one of the first tasks that we're in this is there code impediments that are impacting development of affordable housing. So are we ourselves causing a hurdle that does not need to be there to see affordable housing developed? So based on my experience, my department's experience over the last couple of years, we made a short list of things that you would likely find on any list affecting affordable housing or even the production of any housing across the country. So the one I really focused on was parking requirements. You've addressed that a couple of times with a recent amendment to help support the LIHTC project in Baker. I think last meeting, you also directed us to do another parking change potentially for other things across the city. So parking is really interesting. I think in terms of affordable housing, it's pretty well accepted that lower income households do not have that discretionary income to possess 2 cars very often. Very rare. Vanessa will attest to her experiences. It's not a multi-car household very often and with families she works with. So it's just out of the gate, you can see there's probably not a demand for those 2 or 3 car spots for a 3-bedroom apartment. Student housing, totally different. So our standards have been based on student housing, not market-based. And again, we've made a change in a PUD ordinance to allow for that. You could go further and create just by right standards that have some definitions behind them and have some agreements that would really have to commit property to that use. That's what the PUD does, but that would be an option if we were to look at that impediment. My opinion is at this very moment, that's probably not a huge impediment because of the PUD ordinance. If you're a little bit bigger project and we now have a relief valve for you, it could still be an issue for smaller projects that are trying to do something different than a larger project. Now, the other things that we listed, density, lot sizes, again, I think that's bigger picture. I think that's maybe more towards the market-based housing side. You're not, our minimum lot size is typically 6,000 square feet. That's pretty standard. We talked about making these less previously, and our choice was to keep the standard the same and to use the PUD ordinance as the method of evaluating whether we want to allow for those smaller lot sizes for different subdivisions. And then at densities overall, we have very high densities compared to many communities in Ames. So it's not like we're artificially capping production by just saying We don't want to see intense development. It's not really, that's the limiting factor. It's usually, in my opinion, it's more the availability of any land in the first place. So once you get zoning, the cap on density is not typically the issue. It's finding land that you can rezone to have apartments on in the first place is the bigger constraint. So that's more of a market availability. It's not so much us, but it is probably the strongest influence overall. And then architectural design, I think this is the tough one that you'll come up with. Again, kind of just listening to the conversation about code enforcement, there's a balance of trying to produce something versus the cost to the buyer, the owner, the developer. We've talked a lot with the infill workshop this spring. Infill seems to be like, we're going to go down this path with the caveat that it fits the area. So to fit an area, there's typically an increment of additional costs. You can always build something cheaper and have no regard for what's around you, no aesthetics whatsoever, and just be cheap. This is not the direction that council has been going down. So how are you going to balance architectural design for infill, having reasonable costs instead of no cost to maybe lower that project by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% in cost? So what's the balance there? So I'm not saying in this section that we should be looking at reducing our design requirements. In fact, we really don't have design requirements in almost any of our zoning districts. There's only a couple where we have even architectural standards, which would be the single family conservation overlay, and then the South Lincoln mixed use. Your standard high density zone, your standard medium density zones have 0 architectural design requirements. So again, once you get to that zone, you're free and clear except for parking. So I don't see that as our biggest impediment here. In some places, you maybe have heard criticism of Des Moines, who a few years back wrote into their zoning ordinance minimum house sizes and minimum architectural detail requirements. So they had some goals to improve housing quality in some of their older neighborhoods, and people are doing tear down rebuilds and not putting back things of comparable quality. So they wrote into their code things that absolutely cost money. And they got a lot of flack about what does that mean in terms of affordable housing. And they made some changes, but they did keep standards that said housing quality is going to be important to us, even if it does have a marginal impact on affordability. I don't believe we have those standards right now. So if there's impediments that you want us to follow up on, that's something that would be an outcome of tonight's meeting. It could be something that comes up later if it's not a priority now. We do have a work plan item in the zoning ordinance to reassess certain residential zoning districts because of Ames Plan 2040 goals for density and development in the growth areas. There is a step that's right now scheduled for the end of the year to look at maybe zoning district residential standards overall. So maybe that's a time to look at that versus saying that's a priority now. And maybe it would come out of any market-based assessment or any report from a housing assessment from the market-based developers to just kind of piggyback with that also. So just keep that in mind.
Kelly, is there also potential for us to need an assessment of issues related to the CAP and affordable housing and what those climate action plan goals or strategies imply for affordability?
I think you'd have to tease that out for me a little bit more because we would understand that most of those programs, absent subsidy, have a higher upfront cost, right? And potentially a payback over a longer period of time. So if you're saying that we were to, let's take the net zero ready standard, if we were to apply that to the upfront construction of an affordable apartment complex, yeah, it's going to have a higher upfront cost. And then will that play out with reduced operating expenses? How does that fit in the pro forma? There's probably still going to be a greater gap from doing that, is my guess, but no one's ran that model to tell you that at this point in time. Is that what you're asking about?
Well, I noticed that option 5 on here was identify other code impediments. And that seems like one that's going to be coming possibly down the road, depending where our discussions on the climate action plan go.
Right.
And so is that the kind of thing?
It could be the climate, it could be a climate action plan. It could be another zoning standard that I didn't list that you're aware of or get other feedback as something that impacts housing. Yeah. So it's anything that is a non-required life safety element that may increase the cost of housing production. That's what the code impediment meant to me. We did not go into building code standards. We assumed that life safety of the building code was absent specific comments. We thought that was expected. And we didn't address that at this point. But I think like net zero already is the best example
Mhm.
of talking about, yeah, there's an upfront cost, unknown right now, long-term payback. So do you incentive or not? I don't know that because we haven't brought that to you yet. So I think the other topic is the great transition into incentives. So what we understand as the city is that affordable housing is rarely, if ever, built by the market at the levels that serve, especially below 50% AMI. 60% AMI is probably questionable. So the number one subsidy that has been occurring is through federal programs, the low income housing tax credit. So we're partnering, hoping to get another project like that into the city. The prior LIHTC projects, because the program evolves and changes over time, did not get city assistance. So the two more recent ones, we didn't necessarily subsidize those. They were able to get those on their own. The project we're doing in Baker, we're using federal funds plus seeking that LIHTC, so a greater use of federal funds. And we are trying to talk about, in terms of incentives, not exactly how we would spend federal funds. That might be one of the answers to provide an incentive, but are there other things that can be done to incent housing production beyond using federal funds? So we gave you a list of pretty common things that get brought up. A number of cities have affordable housing strategies. A number of cities have investigated how to either raise revenue to subsidize something or reduce costs. So this kind of a universe of issues is pretty well defined when you start to look around and look at other cities' affordable housing plans. So I think there's some trade-offs here in many ways. As talking this through with Steve, is it an upfront budgeting issue, or is it a project incentive like tax abatement that never goes through the budget? It's something that is a benefit to the developer after the fact. So there's kind of different ways to do these. And on this list, they're obviously not of all the same value. So if you were to waive a building permit fee on an apartment, that is $1,000, maybe $2,000. That's a lot different than what tax abatement is worth over an extended period of time. So there's a question I think that's embedded in the incentive, which gets into the next topic, is are there prerequisites for the funding, and is there kind of an acceptable range of incentive that we want, like percentage wise, that we're actually willing to do. So those are things that eventually, if we're going to have a strategy so that I can communicate to people what we're trying to accomplish when they come in and say, I'd love to do a project, what can you help me with? I have some kind of bracket of conversation to say, this is what we've done, this is what we expect, and this is, if you can do this, council will want to look at this type of project. So I'll need some direction eventually on not just the type of incentives, possibly the value, and then also what are these expectations of prerequisites. So on that list, is there questions about any of those that are listed? I don't want to explain them all, but if you've looked at the list and you wonder how that would help or not help, we'd be happy to respond to that.
Is there any instance in which the property tax abatement gets rolled over to the purchaser? Like we saw with our condos, like when we did the Roosevelt and the Crawford, I think the property tax abatement started with the developer, but then as people bought their units, it transferred to those owners.
So abatement is always to the owner of the unit. So whoever owns it has that amount of their value wiped off the tax rolls, and they're not taxed on that amount of that value. So that carries through to an owner.
Okay.
Kelly, could you remind us the amount of the subsidies that we provided on the Baker subdivision units per unit?
So we did a rough estimate last week. So in terms of, so to date, we've bought land, built Tripp Street, and then put in all the other infrastructure to create the multifamily site and 26 lots. So on a back of an envelope, I would say we have invested in the 26 lots, assigning some value to the multifamily separately, about $77,000 to produce those 26 lots. That's back of the envelope off of the rough numbers.
Per lot.
77,000 per lot.
So, I mean, as we go through here, one of the things that I hope we keep in mind is what is the level of subsidy our community is willing to pay for these efforts?
So then, to be clear, so that's what we've invested. We just sold the lots to Habitat for $50,000. So you could say we put a $27,000 incentive into the production of that single family home. So the cost was 77. We got 50 back. We're putting 27 into that house.
And what about the multifamily units?
So that's the land. Well, with LIHTC, it's a $12 million project, right? So with LIHTC, it's a $12 million project. Our funds is the free land, which I would have valued at $240,000. And we are up to how much in home?
1.8 million.
1.8. So we put about 2 million into the production of 36 low income affordable apartments. Now the difference is the duration there is 30 years of affordability. It's a one-time affordability on the single family home. So we're putting more money in for that longer duration of affordability.
So I know that obviously any talk of potential incentives is going to come back at a later date, but is there value in us, because there are other housing needs, right, besides just low income housing? Is there any value in us, before we have any discussion on incentives, of prioritizing housing types and looking at our 2040 plan goals and saying we need X number of units per year? Where are those buckets coming from, and are we prioritizing certain buckets based on housing type, income levels, and then allotting incentives accordingly?
I think ideally for me, that's what this conversation turns into, is what are our housing priorities? And then specifically, which ones are going to be strategically focused on the low income component. So
Okay.
I think ideally we get to that conversation and understand the overall housing picture and where council wants to put their effort.
Okay,
That's
so
what
we're
it's
not
basically-
making any decisions.
That's what I was suggesting. Don't
about-
do this piecemeal. It would be
Yes.
a comprehensive policy on housing, right?
Okay, yeah,
For low income
hopefully,
to the
yes.
workforce development and maybe the higher end homes
Right.
too, right?
So you have, I mean, this is coming out of a specific council goal. and
I know,
task. Yeah.
yeah.
And then you have the goal is broader than just low income.
Correct.
This task is focused on low income.
Right.
I just want to make sure we're not making decisions that
We don't want-
are not prioritized based on what the
Right.
holistic discussion on housing
Housing strategy.
first. Yeah.
So again, any other questions on the incentive types? So we did try to generate a possible list of prerequisites, or at least issues that we would want some direction on. You could go different ways on a couple of these. I think as we've talked in the past, and we negotiated this into the Baker subdivision project, even 60% AMI, it's good, but 50% AMI is better. So we believe strongly that if anytime we can get a 50% AMI unit, a deeper level of affordability, that should be a priority for us. Again, how long is that affordability available? 30 years to me would be the minimum. Some cities are looking at 50 to 99 years, depending on what they're committing to and what they're expecting out of those projects. One thing that's going to be interesting about this strategy is Vanessa's amazing. She does more than you can imagine for one person. I have no other housing staff, and she has a little bit of assistance from other people from time to time. So when you look at number 3, oversight of the program, when it's through another federal agency or state agency, is a big benefit to us instead of us having that oversight responsibility. So that's one reason why we push LIHTC as an option for Baker in the first place, is it did not involve us having to have ongoing monitoring requirements. So we can push affordable housing. We can have local solutions. Just know that at some point that does relate to staff availability and staff support. And I don't want to go away from local support, but just know that state and federal agency oversight is beneficial to us if we have a partner program like that. Again, some of the other issues, that cost per unit, operational versus capital support, just different things in here that we've asked for in the past. Again, the Section 8 voucher, taking of that within market-based units. So is that directly affordable housing? It's not deed restricted, but if a development will take the voucher, we've created a way for a low-income household to live in Ames. And we can't by law require that. So that would have to be something that's negotiated if we were to do that. So again, if we're giving incentives, we're typically negotiating something. And that's a question. That's something that can be added. That's not a direct cost to the developer, other than they have some administrative responsibilities to go with that they would not otherwise have.
We did do that with the place on Mortensen, didn't we?
That hasn't come back to you, but you did indicate that some version of taking Section 8 vouchers out there in turn for changing over units you would look at that as a proposal. Yeah.
Okay.
So we haven't brought it back to you yet, but that's something that you did say you would entertain that proposal. So I think one that we do need to understand is if there's a geographic preference to incentives, I think you can look at this one two ways. So we're going to need eventually direction on this. There's great arguments on both sides of this one. Anything in the core of the city is easier to serve. We don't have any land in the core of the city. So if that's your number one goal, you're going to have very few affordable housing projects. Now, when we go to the edge, harder to serve, but easier to do. So I think that's a tough one. And my position is we need to have an option where growth for affordable housing our growth includes affordable housing in all areas of the city. But I think there's still that priority for core areas if we can do it. But I'm just afraid we won't produce anything if we say it's only in the core. So that's something that I think in our staff comments, we talk about maybe there's a higher incentive for the core, but still some benefit or some support for things in the growth areas as well. Because I think diversity of housing, we had this discussion with Rose Prairie when they wanted to add density. All of North growth was going to be single family homes at one point. But then as we started to talk about, well, we're really going to grow here and make a neighborhood and expand our community. A community is more than one type of thing. So we added multifamily into that project, even though it's on the edge of the city, but it's going to add a diversity of housing into a new area of the town, a new school district, and create just a different sense of community than just in a homogeneous one type of housing. So I think we should carry that philosophy into all of our growth areas. Plan 2040 already has that embedded in it. So now it's just a question of, do we want to help facilitate the affordable component because there's already multiple housing types planned in each of these areas. Any questions on the prerequisites or other comments right now of something else that might be an issue we would want to consider in a strategy of what we prefer and want to prioritize?
So this first one, affordability levels at or below 50% of AMI, would this include like mixed use projects that have some market rate and some affordable units?
I think it would. It could.
It could. Okay.
I think when we first brought this one up, so LIHTC is an interesting animal, produces a lot of affordable housing. It's really the developer's benefit to get that income to the 60% level. It really helps them. So if we push back and say we're going to partner and we want units that are at that lower level, it helps us get a different type of household into the city. So I think originally we were talking about pushing the 60% down to 50 versus taking a market rate unit all the way down to 50. Mm-hmm. We could. I think that's a tough one for a market-based project to carry, but it depends on the incentive. Maybe it's possible.
What about sustainability features or like reduction of ongoing costs? So sustainability features that would also save energy over time or would cause less costs for heating and cooling.
So add to the list that we would prioritize maybe subsidizing solar. I mean, just pick an easy thing. We'll give you an incentive to install solar to lower the operating costs of an affordable unit. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, so that affordable units would have lower ongoing costs than a property that wasn't built without the sustainable thing, whatever it may be. You know, because
but we would incent that extra investment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Right. So talking about the utilities piece of the rent and utilities cost, you know, trying to bring that piece down through sustainability improvements.
So I'm interested in that in the sense that if we can shuffle the costs around and get the green benefit out of it at no extra cost, that's great. I don't know that we can guarantee the savings goes down to the renter. So, right?
Oh, sure. If it's rental, yeah, I see what you mean.
So I'm not sure how, again, unless we're gonna set our own rent limits or say you got to subtract something out of a utility allowance and not use that because you have lower utility costs, that might be hard to do.
Okay.
We might get the green benefit, but we might not get any lower
financial
rent levels.
I see.
So I don't know that that's true or not, but just kind of talking that through. We don't have the rent, because when you're in the LIHTC, the rents are set by federal requirements and they go up every year. I mean, we're going to approve a project. We have all the formulas based on what it is now. Those rents go up a lot. So it's not ensuring great affordability right after it's started necessarily. It'll meet the limits, but it's going to go up in rent. And that's shown in their pro formas too.
Okay.
So I think anytime you get that co-benefit, if we can partner or not partner, if we can take one of our green things that we want to see for green building or something from the climate action plan and piggyback that into this, yeah, I think that's great. And maybe there's a version that's cost neutral and has a green benefit or has an affordability benefit at the same time. I think those are still good things.
Yeah.
And they can be embedded in this type of strategy. It doesn't just have to be about only the lowest cost housing possible. So the individual strategy we want to talk about is acquisition of land. I think we're a better player in the game if we have something to bring to the table. So one of my first comments was there's no land available if you wanted to build an affordable apartment project in Ames right now. The closest thing you would have is buy land from the Rose Prairie site. It's the only vacant land that's zoned in the city. So not a lot of selection. So if we are able to acquire land, at least we can be a player in that. So we can either proactively acquire land and on some kind of regular basis, say it's available either for a local development project or to say, well, again, we want to partner with LIHTC and maybe our only assistance is the site. Maybe it's not as much as Baker. I mean, Baker was a pretty extraordinary lift on our part to do what we're doing there. And that's not always going to be available. But if we have land, at least we're in the game of trying to find someone that's willing to do a housing project. So to do that, we would have to have some kind, this is a budgeting issue. You would have to create a program and fund it so that we can acquire sites as they become available. Now you could look at it as a larger site where we're buying 2-3 acres to do an apartment project with 40 units in it again, or it could be a strategy to buy lots in a subdivision. So that might be a way to sprinkle some ownership housing into different subdivisions across the city. And then a different version is to acquire more land to do the apartment project. So there's 2 different ways to look at that. And both of them are probably helpful and for different reasons. You're going to get more units out of the apartments, but again, diversifying housing on the ownership side is not something that has value also to us as well.
Kelly, can you explain exactly what's meant by land banking sites? Are we talking about trying to acquire multiple sites next to each other, or are we just trying to acquire a bunch of sites throughout the city?
I don't think they need to be contiguous. I think it's just the ability to bank land so that it's available when you're ready to act. And this isn't necessarily with federal funds. So as Vanessa's done many times, she buys lots for different purposes, remove blight, or maybe for low income housing. There's strings there. If we're using city money, we're free of those strings. Like we have more flexibility in how we want to do that. So I'm not saying we don't use federal funds to do this strategy, but as soon as you do that, it kicks in other requirements that you might not, I mean, you'll live with them because you're still going to get something that's valuable to the city, but you might be able to do more flexible things if it's using city money. Now, ideally, and I don't have an answer for you in this, ideally, if we create some kind of funded program, being able to get a return on that investment and recycle some of those funds for future use should be a goal of ours. So we're not just constantly budgeting money that just goes out the door and never comes back. I don't have an answer on how that works right now because you see the amount of money we're putting into Baker and we're getting nothing back out of the LIHTC piece, right? So that LIHTC investment is just a sunk cost to get that. We're getting some money back out of the single family homes, but that's something to think about too, is how do we continue to fund a program or how do we have available funds to act when we have a project that would be great for us to do?
But we have done when we did our countywide program, we actually banked a lot of money because we helped with down payment and closing costs that they had to pay back. And so that helped us create a pool to have to reuse as well. So that's another way that if you're providing that type, it's something they pay back over time, but you build it up. Also, if they sell within that certain time frame, they pay back that a percent of that investment, and that goes into the pool as well. So we did that for a number of years through our countywide program, that we had a source of funding that we can use to kind of create this city-funded project. But that's another way we've done it in the past.
So that's the overview. And again, tonight, we're not approving anything. The goal is, if possible, to have a direction on what to do next. If it needs to come back at a future council agenda to get that direction, that's an option as well. So we listed under staff comments, kind of a quick summary of the main points. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion under some of those in terms of, especially like under the prerequisites, what are things that we would want to focus on. So I think tonight was, again, to hear discussion, understand what priorities may be, and then to be able to come back and respond to those comments.
Kelly, can I come back to a comment you made at the beginning that our focus really isn't on the market housing? But we live in a very dynamic market. And so as the cost of market housing goes up, eventually that's going to put pressure on housing that would otherwise be low to moderate income. That just gets swept up. And so maybe the house is renovated, maybe it's torn down, there's gentrification. How can we look exclusively at low to moderate income housing apart from the market housing? Aren't those two related?
They're related, but I don't think you can influence the price of a market-based home at the same level as you can with a targeted program to a low and moderate income home. So I believe, I 100% agree, housing supply is very critical to maintaining affordable housing supply in your cities. Growing the supply, you got to have that. If there's no growth, it's going to do what you say. It's going to inflate prices, right? But from a strategy perspective, we don't have enough funding to meaningfully change the cost of a brand new construction of a market-based home. I mean, if they're building them at $350 as the starter level, and we're questioning how we're going to build a $200,000 home in Baker, we just don't have the funding to directly do that. So I want to increase supply, absolutely. That should be a goal of ours, but we should find out how are there impediments to that versus direct financial subsidies to it.
I thought he just
At least
meant
that's how I'm thinking of it.
At this workshop, our focus is, though, I mean, we're going to hear more information and suggestions about market rate housing impediments and what we might do about those. Right. Well, we got a memo on that, didn't we? Isn't that?
Is the response to the task force request from, was it the chamber or the AEDC?
The AEDC.
So Steve gave you an update that they're going to do that.
Coming on that. So that's.
So it's not like we're not going to look at our strategies around market, but for the purposes of this workshop and what we can incentivize.
I just don't think you can have that conversation without having the other one.
I think it's sort of an odd conversation, as if those housing pressures somehow they don't exist, and all of that stuff matters, and not just in Ames, but actually the surrounding communities. I mean, in fairness, Peter Rossman used to tell us all the time that a third of the people who work in Ames live outside of Ames, and so the housing availability in Slater, in Gilbert, they impact the conversation as well.
I just mean we will be talking about those things. I think the purpose of saying it was this workshop is going to focus on low and moderate income.
This task was
this task.
designed exclusively for this issue, and I think it earns its own place in the conversation because nobody in the market is going to address this question. Lots of people are interested in making a profit on a $400,000 house. Very few people are interested in making a living off of a 50% AMI household. So I don't think that that's going to be addressed. I understand the loss of existing housing stock potentially to someone having to maybe buy down to get into what they want. But you're just not going to be able to influence that production of an actual low and moderate income house without direct action by the
Let me
city.
just give you one example. So you mentioned the goal of moving towards a 55% rental target. So, and you were right to recite the history that when Iowa State's enrollment expanded, there was no capacity to build multifamily fast enough to meet that need. And so the market did what the market does. It bought single family residences, took those out of owner occupied and shifted them to rental. So there was a huge shift in the market, as you rightly recited.
That's not exactly what, that's not the detail I was saying. It was total households. So it actually includes those thousands of apartments that were built. So it wasn't just about converting single family homes. It was about total housing production over 10 years. So there's there's still only, I think the last time we quoted this, maybe 1,000, 1,100 single family rentals in the city.
I think you're all saying the same thing. I think you're going to have to deal with two strategies. Again, affordable housing is going to be an important topic. And then you're going to have all the other housing, because we always embedded in your plan is to provide housing opportunities at all income levels. So it's going to be a coordinated or combined housing strategy. And one is not going to, I mean, you'll deal with it differently. Maybe there's different levels of subsidy and all that, but don't think this is the end of the discussion.
Oh, no, but
And they interrelate. A comprehensive housing strategy will take into account all those things.
So I have a question, Kelly. When was the last time that we approved a building permit for a multifamily large apartment building?
So there's only one that's under construction. Bricktown is building out its last 2 phases. So that was approved years ago and they've slowly built it out. So literally a building permit issued, but a new approval has been a few years. So I would look at it as like a site plan approval. We haven't approved a new multifamily project in years.
And so I would suggest that be part of our conversation. If we want to take pressure off the single family homes, people have to find a place to rent. And so if there aren't sufficient rental units, that's just going to increase the market for people buying up single family homes. So, I mean, this is a very dynamic conversation.
I don't know that I would agree that influence is great across so there is a market trend nationally to create single family rentals, right? There's real estate investment trusts that now do this. It's something that we talked about when we want to do the rental cap concentration, how that was a trend nationally. It's not a big number, but it does exist. I don't think that you see the lack of apartment construction directly significantly impact the conversion of a single family home, because it's a different product type, a different type of investor.
Agreed. But ultimately, the vacancy rate in multifamily at some point affects the single family rental. It has to. They're not completely unrelated.
Not completely, but I don't know they're as direct, because so much of it is, I would agree that the lack of the product, again, back to my main point on impediments, there is no land to build those apartments. So without, I believe we're 3 years behind building. There should be an apartment project built every year.
And I
just
agree with
hasn't
that.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've had, right. We were hoping the link would be online by now. So like we've had other ideas that should be providing housing stock to the city. There's nothing really affordable about the link. It's just adding housing stock to hit a different market segment than what we have in the city. And it hasn't been done. So we just haven't seen the Rose Prairie site. We haven't seen the link. Those things have just stalled out where we had expected those to exist by now. And we should be moving into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th project. And yet we're still back on those 2. And the market just is struggling to get forward with those things. So I'm 100% agreeing. We have a constrained housing supply. The developers that even have land aren't proceeding. I mean, the economy has not been friendly to housing construction in the last year. And some of these go back more than 1 year. I'm not saying that it's just 1 year, but it's been a tough environment in the last for everything.
I think that everyone up here recognizes there's a relationship between what we do with our single family market rate housing and what we do with our low and moderate income housing, because of that growing cost for so many of the single family homes. We have seen increasing pressure on the smaller, older homes to be sold very quickly at prices that are well above their assessed value and well above the asking price. So I think we recognize that. What I would say about tonight is perhaps that we have a number of things that Kelly has brought up in the staff comments that maybe direction we could give, or we could think about this further in conjunction with other things that we are going to be discussing in the future. And I personally would prefer to do that. Simply because I think there are complexities that we need to examine. And I also think that we are not necessarily in our best decision-making mode at this point after a very long
Right.
codes workshop. So my preference would be to continue the discussion and recognize that tonight is about LMI incentives and strategies, and that the rest of that conversation occurs in the future.
Yeah, that's what we suggest.
So does anyone have further questions or concerns about, perhaps about the staff comments and the next steps that are recommended here? We've got 5 possible recommended steps that we could discuss, or you could sit with them for a while and think about them if you don't have any immediate points you'd like to make or questions you'd like to ask.
Do we know when the next, or when the report from the chamber task force is coming, or when
I think they're
a further
finalizing.
discussion?
Well, yeah, I have this memo here, just so the council knows that the task force is now kind of internal to the chamber. And they decided rather than have a city task force, they would do it. And I think they're completing their finishing touches on the report. And I think they offered to sit down with city staff at less and brief us and see what we think, and that'll be brought forward, I think, or we give it to the council. So I don't think it's months away. It's probably weeks away, I would think.
Those following next steps you gave us, 1 through 5 there, are any of them exclusive, mutually exclusive? Or, I mean, they all look good, right? So, but is that like, but your intent wasn't to be like, yeah, they all look good. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, I think they were the things that were highlighted in the report. And I don't know that they're all at the same priority level, if that's what you're saying.
well,
Like, I don't, personally, I don't view like the zoning impediments at the same level as having a defined incentive program.
But are some of them
And land
able to be
acquisition is going
pulled
to take
out?
time, so it has to be created, and it's going to be a while till that's funded and ever could be done. So, right, that's not something that's going to happen this summer.
No, that's going to have a budget time.
So
The incentives, you've got to compare to the other comprehensive program again. It's got to be blended together.
But I look at this and thinking of Bronwyn, I look at number 4,
I did like that one.
which has to do with the required parking. Now, that doesn't seem like something that necessarily has to be connected to those other issues because it's broader than just LMI discussions. And I know Bronwyn would love to see it.
Before it is
broadened.
LMI only. Everything on this list is LMI only. It's not to reduce residential parking rates across the
Across the
city.
board.
It's to reduce them for income restricted apartments only.
And did we not do that? We did it with PUD.
Within the
Yeah.
PUDs
PUDs,
only.
yeah.
So within the PUD, you dropped the rate that council can approve to 1.5 per unit.
Okay. So I could make a motion. You guys want a motion on that?
Why don't we wait on that? I want to see if anybody has input to give on this. I think Loris has a card. Does anyone else have input on this? Okay, Loris, come on up and introduce yourself and your address.
Thank you, Loris Olson, President Home Allies, 1705 Buchanan Drive. And I'm excited to see the report. There's some really good ideas in here. I'm going to focus on the zoning impediments, and I have a little story to tell you. When everybody was talking about what are we going to do about a shelter, and they were talking about Asset putting out a new RFP, in addition to some market conditions that are affecting 913, 915, the Duff Avenue project, I thought that maybe it was time to figure out if there was the ability to convert a motel in this town. I picked up the phone and I made a phone call to a motel located very close to downtown. And the gentleman is interested in selling. I went out over the next 2 months. We had multiple discussions. I called Kelly a couple times. I really appreciate the staff and the feedback they gave, et cetera. But the bottom line was the deal fell apart. And in fact, networking had produced a cash buyer to help partner with the Home Allies to create about 27 affordable units with very little remodeling in the hotel that then later could have been converted into like whole family units in the future, but it's zoned highway-oriented commercial. And we do not allow apartments in highway-oriented commercial. And so the buyer walked away. There was a secondary condition that actually is where I originally inquired of the city in part, was the parking requirements. This has enough parking to have one parking space per every one of the 47 rooms, if you will, or units, and but not 1.5. And so because of really the zoning is the investor who does this nationally and was interested in coming in and particularly focuses on Section 8 housing, everything we wanted, 6 blocks from downtown, right? Cash, we lost it. And so I urge you that as you discuss your low and moderate income strategies, that you really don't consider any particular detail as secondary or being able to be put off too much. Because to have done this deal, we would have had to have come to you with a text amendment on highway-oriented commercial, not a small feat, right? I mean, definitely couldn't do it within the 90 days that we needed to save the emergency vouchers. There were 30 emergency vouchers that SIRHA needs to go ahead and try and use or turn back to HUD on September 30th. So please, just as you work through here, respecting the staff's time, but to let you know that nothing is just little when you figure about why we lost that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for that input, Loris. I think that's a really good point to make, because thinking about code, we also could be thinking about those things like our zones and what's allowed in those zones, especially if we're trying to be a little bit more flexible on how we do our LMI housing. Others who may have things they want to bring up, I don't think we've got anybody else out here. No. Okay. So, Bronwyn, you were going to.
Yeah.
bring something up?
So I'm interested always in reducing parking requirements for low and moderate income housing, not just for PUDs, but for all of those. Do you have a fair enough idea of how you would do that if I were just, say, to move to direct staff to bring us a proposal on a reduction in parking? Or do you need more specifics than that?
I guess the only real question would be, we'll write a definition and we would require some kind of limitation put on the property to acknowledge that you're going to do that. So the question would be whether council has to approve that or staff. So if you thought of like a remote parking request or a shared parking request, those are things that come to council because there's an agreement attached with it to say, yes, I understand, I'm going to agree to do this. So my thought would be it would come to council as an agreement to operate the property as with a low and moderate income housing, whatever that is, and they agree it's going to be for a defined period of time. And I think you have to have that hook of 30 years. It's not good enough to show up and say, I'll do it for 2, 3, 5, and then start renting to students, and it's all different.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if I left you the discretion to bring
To
back
produce
that,
the text amendment,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that wouldn't be hard for, the boundaries of that are pretty narrow.
Okay.
And I think I would lean towards council approving it as an
Yeah.
agreement.
I mean, that sounds fine, but yeah, whatever you think on that one. So I would go ahead and move that we direct staff to pursue a text amendment to allow for the reduction of parking requirements in other zoning districts when it comes to low and moderate income housing.
To that 1.5 level that we're using for the PUD.
I was going to leave that up to you.
Okay.
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Do we have any discussion?
Well, respectfully, I'm not even sure what this motion is. And could you make you?
You want me to
This
clarify?
sounds extremely broad.
Oh, well,
It's on staff comments number 4.
Like, I have that. Could you maybe just explain again what your goal is in the motion?
sure. So my goal in this motion is that staff would bring us a suggested text amendment that would allow for the reduction in a parking requirement for housing, if that housing is low to moderate income. And Kelly mentioned a few things that I thought were good ideas about how if we were to grant reduced parking, that would come back to council for approval if we were to do that on a case-by-case basis, right? That's what you meant by that.
It'd have an agreement approved by council.
And again, so it's not, I'm not setting any sort of maximum for parking or anything like that, but just the option for if a person, say, had a lot that they wanted to develop into affordable housing, but they didn't have enough land to meet the current parking requirement for housing, that they could propose a reduced parking area because that housing is affordable.
I think what target it hits is for sites under 2 acres. So if you're over 2 acres and you're building 20, 30, 40 units, you might just be able to take advantage of the PUD ordinance. But if you're a smaller site and you want to build 6, 8, 10, 12, you don't have an option for reduced parking. So this amendment would treat a smaller site basically equal to a PUD in terms of the parking standard, is what I believe. That would be the outcome of what you just made a motion for.
Sure.
It's
Because otherwise they could use the PUD.
It did. We used it at Windsor Point. So you took a senior housing unit and you put the PUD over the whole complex to average out the parking and make that a new affordable. It was restricted before, but to make it more family-based affordable housing units. And then you applied the reduced parking rate across the site.
And this is basically what you described on page 7 of the staff report, I think, where council could direct staff to proceed with parking code changes related to affordable housing development subject to land use and affordability restrictions. And the mention of sites under 2 acres and the 30-year requirement, right?
Yeah. It's option 1 listed on page 7 and 8.
Kelly, as part of this, would you be bringing back examples of peer communities that have made similar changes just to help us understand? I feel like we're making a decision a bit in a vacuum on this, and I worry about the law of unintended consequences. So it sounds nice to take the parking out of a project, but there are implications then. Where do those cars go? And people are still going to need cars.
Well, they have fewer in affordable housing units typically than a market rate house.
So I think this is what we did. I'll pull whatever resources I can find. There's some information out there. So this was the trade-off with Windsor Point. You're getting a 30-year commitment to affordable housing. Now, at the end of 30 years, they're not income restricted. And you're saying that I'm willing to accept this 30-year commitment for some benefit of that housing, knowing that it will have less parking in the future if it was to change over to some other use. It's really after that affordability period is really the trade-off.
Absolutely. And so 30 years sounds a lot of time here, but in our horizon for planning, we have to think longer than that.
People had better be using their cars less in 30 years or we are screwed as a planet.
But that's not our role as a council to.
Yes, it is.
No,
Yeah,
it's
well,
absolutely not.
It is to look
We
at the
don't-
trends.
We don't
in
have, we're not
cars.
social, we're not social planners to control what people do with their lives. It's still
Oh,
America.
we-
People are free to buy automobiles and have cars. That's not our role as a council.
We absolutely guide people's everyday decisions through the decisions that we make up here.
Well, then why not be more aggressive? You could do so much more.
I don't think that's the motion on the table.
But it's my comment on the
So-
motion. If we're not going to have a thoughtful, comprehensive approach, we're not anti-car here. People are free. Most of us drove here tonight. We didn't walk here.
Part of our climate action plan is absolutely going to be encouraging people to drive cars less.
Mhm.
I'm not saying we're forcing them. I'm saying we're encouraging. And some of that is through decisions we make.
So I think,
Yeah.
So I think as a council decision, you might not reach the same conclusion on 190th Street about what a parking reduction should be compared to South Third Street, right?
Mhm.
You might not want to grant a significant parking reduction when you're on the edge of the city because there is no viable alternative besides driving. Versus if you're in South Lincoln mixed use area, you can walk, take the bus, you can bike, or you can drive. So I think that this method is intended to give council that ability to say, whoa, this doesn't make sense here because there is no other option to drive. We want to use the same parking
And
standards.
this is where the question of discretionary versus by right comes in.
Right. And that's where I think the council approval mechanism to vet the proposal, understand what those commitments are, understand who the provider is of that housing. Have they done it before? Do you really trust that that's what they're going to do? I think that has to be part of a council level decision.
My sole point, I mean, there's plenty of votes to pass this, is that we have lots of examples in this community of short-sighted decisions, well-intentioned, but short-sighted, that didn't take into account possible consequences. All I'm suggesting is that we proceed in making these decisions with caution. That's all I'm suggesting. I think there's more to this than meets the eye.
I think that'll be a point for discussion once staff brings us back the report. So we have a motion on the table. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion carries. Are there other points that council would like to explore at this point, or shall we leave it for another day?
I think since most of the other next steps include incentives, I think it would make sense to kind of digest and talk about it in a broader conversation.
I think so.
In that case, I will thank staff for presenting this very thoughtful report for us to think about.
Thanks for staying late.
Thank you.
And we will move on to disposition of communications to council.
Number one is requested, we have a memo for you for information from Justin Clausen on our sidewalk safety program. There were some concerns of how we administer that program, and we wanted to give you some information. You've got information on peer communities, how we established our particular standard, how we handle it on a complaint basis. So I think we've responded to your request. And then secondly, was a memo from me. I just wanted to make sure you understood the original request came from the chamber about establishing a task force. And it was a little confusing whether it was going to be a city's appointed task force. I think in talking to Dan Colleen, we agreed that they were going to have their own internal group, and they had a representation from home builders and developers and things like that. I think they had a robust discussion. I did outline what I thought, and the mayor and I talked about these principles too, because you asked the mayor and I to brainstorm it. I laid out a memo to him about what I thought the council would like to see in the way of review of this particular topic. So we'll see if they've covered most of them. I think they have, and we'll report back, and then we'll have a robust discussion about that too.
So at this point, unless someone wishes to make a motion that we do something with the report from Justin, we will accept these reports and move on. Okay, then council comments. Bronwyn.
Nothing for me tonight. Thanks.
Rachel?
So I got back from a wonderful visit to Koshu, Japan, our sister city. Learned a lot from the people there and the way that their city functions, and excited to share that with you and then welcome their delegation to Ames in October.
Awesome.
And when did you get back?
5 p.m.
Welcome back.
Dedication.
Amber,
Nothing for me.
Anita.
We had a great Juneteenth weekend celebration. Had a few glitches along the way, but generally everything went well, including our event out at the James Herman Banning Airport and our play on Saturday during the celebration. So great weekend. Thank you to council and to the community for your support.
Nothing tonight.
Nothing? I would second Anita's assessment of the weekend, and I would just tell council that I was thanked multiple times for the council vote to rename the airport. There was a lot of gratitude and joy among the people who attended the dedication. Steve, do you have anything in addition for us tonight?
No.
In that case, I'll take
Should
a
I say
motion.
something? Or are you asking
No,
me to
that's
say that?
okay. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Move we
Motion-
adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thanks for asking.